after working, whatever, whatever the thing might be. I liked the idea, just giving an opportunity for members, board members, if they wanted to have an opportunity to say something. It could be just a generic, thank you for so and so for bringing, but I agree that we would all have to have rules, and I think that these are good rules to have as the dialogue to comment, that it should not be a direct conversation because that would turn it into something else. And it should not be a debating forum. That's not the point of it either, because that would have to be an agenda item at a discussion section. That's not the intention either. And I anticipated when I just brought it up because I liked the idea. When we do have instances where public comments can get heated, I liked the idea to have at least the ability to, just to say, I think we should look into this or something, but thank you, but keeping it very generic. I don't think that it should be an in-depth discussion of that issue, because that certainly is not an agenda topic and that could go off the rails. It should be limited. I don't even think we would need a 3-minute per person thing. So that was my idea.
Okay.
If I'm not in the minority, if I'm in the minority of wanting this, I'm not offended if we decide not to do it after speaking to the attorney about it. I just thought, hearing that some other boards have done it, I liked it as a concept and so that's why we talked about it in November or December after coming back from IASB, when I heard about it and brought it up, and we did it.
Okay.
I didn't even realize we were putting it on the agenda today. I thought we were still in the discussion phases of whether or not we wanted to do this, but that's my thoughts on it. I like the idea, but I don't even anticipate that all of us would use it every month.
And you're
there may
viewing
not be a
it
need.
as serving a different purpose than
Right.
the president's prerogative, which is kind of a wrap up. What do we need to do for the next,
Correct.
where we gather next? So the purpose is a little different.
Yeah.
Ray, you were going to say something before.
Yeah, I'm still not fully understanding when this would come into play. But I do say, even when we first started talking about this, that I agree with what the points are that the attorney is making. I just see that there's a potential of having this go south on us. If we start trying to make a comment. I don't know that I think it's a good idea.
If the majority of people are in favor of it, I'm sort of in favor of it, but I guess the one thing I would caution us is so that we don't hear about fireworks on the roof at one of the schools in chapter 15 of the school boarding book. I just happened to notice that as I was reading. I'm like, oh, how timely. So I think I agree exactly what you said, and I think Katie took this much more as like a response to public comment, which I don't think
was the intention, and I agree. If that was why we were trying to implement it,
right,
totally understand why we need to shy away.
Of course.
And if we do decide to implement it, we clearly need to have rules and norms that we would have to abide by, that we would put in as part of our new board member training or whatever, so that is clear. And we could even refresh, and have a little statement that we read at the beginning of each, just like we do at the beginning of the public comment, to remind everybody what the rules are. And, and the idea would be, tread carefully, it's not intended to be a public speech or anything. It's just, I liked the idea of having the option, but I don't know that
And
we'd even use it.
I like it.
You and I worked on putting it together. So we do
If
that.
everybody wants to, I'm not-
I was waiting for you to finish. I was
I
going to
think
say,
it's a nice way, because we've been talking about ways to increase communication, not only amongst ourselves, but with the community, and that we could try it. We could do a trial period and see how it goes, and does it serve a purpose? If month after month, nobody says anything, then we can drop it.
so what do people think? Is this something that you want to try, or at least come up with some rules or suggestions of doing it and then trying it, or what does everyone think?
I think as long as we
Try
put
it.
parameters in place, I'm willing to try it for sure.
Yeah.
So we definitely need to be, considerate of the bullet
Right,
points here,
right,
make
of
sure
course.
that we don't.
Of course.
Sure.
Okay, so we will put something together then, and we'll look at it for next week, or next month, sorry. Got it.
When's also works next spring break.
But I will say this, and I agree with you about President's Prerogative being later. It might be a good thing to have something at the beginning of the meeting, maybe. So in that vein, I just want to, as the board, as the president of the board, that this has gone out as a press release, we've seen it on, I've seen it on Facebook and everything, but I just want to sort of publicly recognize mechanics guru, fifth grade teacher Jackie Uni and Lincoln teacher Ashley, I'm not even going to pronounce this name right. Ashley Biner-Hassett. Good, excellent, thank you. They were nominated by their principals for merit, and they earned meritorious service awards for the Illinois State Board of Education Teacher of the Year program. So 2 teachers in our district, I think that's fantastic. So congratulations to them. Congratulations to the principals that nominated them, and then all the people on their teams that work with them, because I'm sure it's not just them, it's the people that are on their team too. So congratulations to them.
Kevin,
Yes,
excuse me for interrupting, but just so you know, it was all of that that nominated those.
Okay. in the press release, you're quoted, so that's why. I asked. Okay, so we will work on the BOE comment section. And we will proceed next to our next item on the agenda is the District 75 report of the business office.
Good evening. There is one thing on the agenda for the business office report, and that would be the extension of our contract with the transportation company, Lakeside. The school code allows us to have a contract for 3 years and to extend that contract for up to 2 years. What we're coming with to you tonight is with that extension request. It is coming with a cost of 7% first year and 6% the second year. And there's a list of reasons why these increases are generally higher than we've seen in the past. That's in your board packet. Hopefully a chance to review that. But at this point, administration is requesting that the Board of Education approve the contract extension with Lakeside for the FY 23-24 school year and 24-25 school year at increases of 7% and 6% respectively. Any questions?
We just finished it, or we're going to finish a 3-year contract, right?
Yep.
Can you talk about, because most of these people weren't here when we did the current 3-year contract?
Yes.
Talk about, just very briefly, about our past experience with our bus company and then how the new 3-year contract has gone. Just so they have a sense of where we were, where we're going, and why we're asking to do this extension with the increases, please.
Yes, so our original company when I started was Durham. They were the one bidder that the district had at the time. So you have one bidder and you need transportation, you're taking that bidder. They had done our routes for years and years. So they had the timing down, they had the students down. The issue that we had with them was they would do things like leave a kindergartner without an adult supervising. And we had several situations like that. So we were very happy when we sent out our request for bid and we had 2 bidders. Lakeside actually increased their rates significantly at the time and they were outbid by Lakeside. So we've gone ahead and gone with Lakeside. We've had some startup issues because again, they didn't know our routes and they weren't as versed on things. We've been working through that for the last 3 years. One of the reasons we are going for a contract extension and not rebidding at this moment in time is that because of bus shortages and gas prices and the economy in general, if we were to go out and bid a 3-year contract, we would probably likely get higher rates than we would if we were just to extend this contract and rebid in 2 years. So that's kind of where we are in this process. And again, we're just at this point asking for the contract extension with Lakeside. Did that answer your question, Kevin?
Yes, thank you so much. Any questions for T about buses? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next on our agenda is the teaching and learning report, and I believe we're going to start with summer school.
Hello, how are you? Good. So we are looking, that's right. We're looking forward to offering summer school again this year. We are structuring a little bit differently than we did in the previous year. And for a couple of reasons. One, to support our staffing and to consolidate the use of our building space so that we can have all of the students in proximity. to each other. And then it also helps with allowing both the staff and the students to have some summer vacation of their own. I think we all need a little bit of a summer vacation, and so it will give them some time to have a reprieve as opposed to extending the length of the summer school program. So this year, thank you. We're going to run our summer school from June 13th through June 30th. There's no class on June 20th because that's Juneteenth Day. It's a holiday now for us. And we're going to extend the length of the school day. So instead of last year where it ran 8 to 11, we're going to run it 8 to 12:20 so that we can offer math support as well, in addition to a snack and recess break. So it feels more like a half day of school. And then that way we'll be able to do some literacy work and some math work and get in some extracurricular activities. So we're looking forward to that. The intention is to invite students based on our scores. Initially, we had the teachers share flyers at our our February spring-ish conferences to say, you know, we're considering you for summer school. We hope to see further progress. You may be receiving an invitation, save the date. We intend on not charging the families, and we will make transportation available for everyone who needs it to attend. The next slide covers the grades. We're going to be offering our incoming first graders through our incoming eighth graders. We're actually working with Mundelein High School to offer a jumpstart program for the freshmen. And so those are our exiting eighth graders. We'll have a program available for them over at MHS. And so we're going to focus on the students who are coming to us for this incoming school year. And then, like I mentioned, we're going to use two schools. We're going to use Mechanics Grove for our first through fourth graders and Carl Sandburg for our fifth through eighth graders. Because we are offering it to this wide range of age levels in terms of physical equipment, it's nicer to have the younger students in smaller chairs and desks and our older students in larger chairs and desks, and then we don't have to move furniture from school to school. We can just have them in those two buildings. Kindergarten readiness is something that we have sitting in the queue as an anticipated program through our Jumpstart grant. The intention, we have applied for the grant. We're hoping to receive that funding. The last time I talked to our ISB rep, he said that either the end of March or early April, we should hear back. And if we were to receive it, that would be a $20,000 grant for us to use in order to run a Jumpstart program in August for our incoming kindergarten students, which would be a nice opportunity to talk about, this is what it's like to be in our school. This is what the classrooms look like. This is how you behave on a school bus. All of those lovely things that we would like our students to know and be able to get excited for before they start their first formalized instruction in our district. And again, transportation will be available for them. Our extended school year is going to be happening in tandem with our summer school program. And so this is where having them run at the same time will be helpful, because then when we have our social workers available, we'll have the nurse aides available, we have our summer school coordinator there. And so we'll be able to kind of support both of these programs together as all of us are in the building at the same time. Their extended school year it starts a week sooner. So they actually start the week of June 6th. So they're a 4-week program, where our other summer school program is the 3-week program. But again, still no classes for Juneteenth Day. In anticipation of the cost, these are some projections of what we anticipate. This past school year, we had 90 students in attendance. And so the goal is to have 90 students again. The kindergarten readiness grant, I already talked about through the Jumpstart, extended school year, and then our summer school leader stipend is a great opportunity for our current D75 staff to have a leadership role. We'll still have our administrators in the building who have their administrative certificate, but for, building our own and having growth in terms of our teacher leadership, this is a really nice opportunity for them to kind of experience what it's like to run a school. So they'll get the chance to do that this summer. Oh, questions?
What is the anticipated length of, if we get the grant, the kindergarten readiness? Is that a one-day program that you're looking to run, or what? I'm just asking what that would look like.
So Jamie and Steffi and I have been kind of playing out ideas. I think it would at least be one day. If we could stretch it to 3 or 4 days, that would be great to kind of just get them acclimated to the routine of coming on a regular basis. But it will be dependent, we're gonna invite all of the kindergartners who are registered. And so then we'll be able to make those decisions closer to, I'd like to not make them too close because I want to give parents the opportunity to plan accordingly. So as soon as we know we have that grant funding available, we'll start the planning process and be able to nail down those dates.
You anticipate somewhere between one
Between
one day and a week?
yes, with 1 day and a week.
Okay.
We're just gonna try and do it that, yes, yes, sorry, thank you.
Excited to hear about the Jumpstart program. I think that's great. I know we've talked a little bit about the impact that the pandemic has had on our second graders.
Yes,
I think the same thing applies to our incoming kindergartners whose daycare and preschool experience have also been impacted by that. So I'm excited to hear about that. Fingers crossed.
I know, yes, we have our fingers, our toes, everything's crossed.
Great. Anything else for Sarah? Thank you, Sarah.
Welcome. I think I'm up for the
Or
next
you're not
one,
too
so
sorry.
you don't have to,
Staffing.
as opposed to walking back, I'll just hang out and tease my backup here. So as we started looking at our staffing for the 22-23 school year, this is a conversation we started as an administrative team back in December before winter break. And great, thank you. This is just a one shotter, so hopefully it's okay. And you'll see based on the chart, we had our staffing allocations for 21-22, and we do have some staff who do work in multiple buildings. And so for the essence of this document, instead of dividing a person in half, like a parent coordinator or a social worker or a psych, we just assign them to one particular building for the purposes of streamlining the numbers. So you will see this year we had 147 total FTE with 1,625 students in attendance. And so based on our numbers in December, we were anticipating a post-COVID world where we were looking at class sections that were pre-pandemic. And what, based on the decreased student enrollment of our incoming kindergarten groups coming in smaller than our exiting eighth graders, what we anticipated in terms of our staffing. Since then, because we started this back in December and we've kind of worked through it these last couple of months and looking at our academic performance of our students, looking at where we're at in terms of our staffing needs, that's when we came to the proposed updates for 22-23, which is a slight change from the initial projections, but due to retirees, where there's no reduction in force in this particular situation because we had 4 retirees this year. And so we are still replacing people who have resigned and 1 retiree. And we still, based on this updated change in FTE and proposed schedule and doing the calculations, our class sizes will stay roughly the same for our student to teacher ratio, even with the updates.
1625 number, is that current or is that?
That's current,
Okay.
yes. Mhm.
I was thinking, the reason I asked this because Kevin talked about in our agenda meeting that that number has gone up so far this year.
Yes, and so this is the updated number, which is also one of the reasons why we changed the proposal from our initial projections to the current projection, because we're anticipating, even though right now we have about 70 students registered for kindergarten, we know that we're going to continue to get enrollment, and we also traditionally get new students who come into the district in the summer. And so by anticipating these 3 additional staff members, we believe we'll be able to absorb any new students that would move in and still maintain our class sizes.
So is the -91 number, the projection, just subtracting the class that's leaving with what we think is coming in?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, and yes, the incoming class of kindergarten and the exiting eighth graders.
And then the reason I ask that is because just if we get more students like we have this year, if that trend continues, that number might change a little bit.
It might change a little bit, yes. These are based on what we've seen in terms of our trends for the last 3 years is the data we've been working with. And then more recently, what we saw this past school year.
Okay, what is the last 3-year trend of getting more students throughout the school year?
Okay, I want to say 17, but I could be wrong. So that I can get back to you on.
17 students. Is that what you're saying?
I think that by the time if students leave and then come in, we were still adding.
Yeah, 'cause
So
we
a
got
good number, we should probably follow up.
We
on
should
with
probably
the
follow up
actual,
before I make up something, yes.
That's fine, yeah. And then I just wonder, like, what was it like last year and the year before,
So,
just to get a sense?
so we would get like 25 in the first semester coming in because that would do the folders, but I wasn't tracking how many went out.
Okay.
So we would get about 25 a semester coming in.
Okay.
We will confirm that. And don't write that number down.
And the numbers I would think in this last 2 years are gonna be a little different anyway, because we have very different school
What are you
years.
talking about?
I know, it's a little weird, but, so, my question was, and I think it's been answered, was having to do with, I know that enrollment is still ongoing, and I know that we're, keep getting those emails, and my kids are enrolled, I know. That I think we give a discount if they enroll and pay by May, so there may be some families that just haven't done that yet, and so are we already accounting for that, or are we doing that based on today's numbers?
Yes, so we do take our current cohort of students and roll them up.
Okay.
And then we make the projections for kindergarten, and then we add a few students to each of the grade levels.
And we make an adjustment for first grade, because that's where you generally see the biggest adjustments in the incoming kindergarten and the first grade for those people who went maybe private for kindergarten. Those adjustments have all been made when we calculated and made our estimates. So we do follow the cohort survival method with our own projections for KG and 1.
Does anyone else have any other questions or anything? I just wanted to just make a comment. I didn't think I could get that on the questions in time so that we could have something happen for today. But I'm thinking with newer board members, when we used to do staffing, back in the day when I'm joking, but we used to get like a chart just to know we had, this many science teachers at Sandberg, and we had this many music teacher here. And I think it would be helpful for the newer board members to know that rather than just we're going down 3. I think it'd be really helpful just to understand where everything is, where it's all laid out. You know what I mean?
By
Does that make sense,
content-
everyone?
I agree.
By content and by building.
There's a template, I've
There's a
seen
template.
it.
Okay.
I'll provide you with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be something that we've used before.
Well, it's a matter of grade level too. I mean,
Right.
I know one of our largest classes is our current second grade class moving up to third. So clearly I would imagine that same class is like moving up, but trying to understand the projections, not questioning them, just trying to understand, it would be helpful to see, oh, we anticipate having 8 sections of this and 4 sections of that, because I lose track, especially with the dual language moving up and how that impacts some of the things. It would be helpful to see that, but it doesn't change what you're bringing. I agree. I think it would be helpful.
And I also think it would be helpful for the discussion we're gonna have in a little while about MG. About knowing, like Christy was saying, that second grade class, eventually, they're gonna be at MG. So,
This fall.
Yes, it's quickly, it's fast
Yeah.
approaching.
Yeah.
yeah, so, okay. Thank you,
You're welcome. Any
Anything
other
else?
questions?
thank you.
Okay, so I have 2 things to get back to you on.
Sound good?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Next up is the superintendent's report.
So I'll try to use the clicker, Anna. So just so everybody knows, when we went through rehearsal and I'd used the clicker, it would fast forward by about 7 pages at a time. So if that happens, you're just gonna need to read real quick, and I'll summarize for you through everything. This evening, there's 2 items that I had on my agenda, and the first one is the school start time, and the second one's gonna be in regards to the MG capacity report. We're gonna start off with the school start time proposal. In the summary, I do want to make sure we note that there was a typo in there where there was a request about starting in August of 2023. That should be August of 2022. So before we begin, as we go forward for everybody here, tonight, we will be recommending that our buildings in District 75 do have new start times. So as we go through the data, and you get to see that in this evening's presentation, keep that in mind. And so then we get in the end, if we have other questions that we need to have clarification for you tonight, that we can do that at that time. Okay? All right. School start time proposals. We started this process almost a year ago to the date. It's March 13th of last year. And one of the things that we wanted to do is join in with 120 and see what would be the potential benefit. I think one of the things that came out was it was unquestionable really from the data that we knew for the older students, essentially saying from 6th grade on up, having a later start time for the day was beneficial. The part where we started to see and investigate was there was some concerns in regards to what is the impact for our younger students that we weren't aware of. And we are very fortunate in that we have a community member, also part of Rush University, that was willing to partner with us. And Dr. Nicole Rousseau Ponceron is with us tonight as well. So if I start stumbling, she's there to be my backup as well as we go through the data. Because what we ended up doing is after last year, we heard the concerns, right? A couple more, the later start time for our younger students, not wanting to be out the bus at a certain, when it was still dark outside, wanting to make sure we could still try to find out what would be an appropriate range for sleep so that we could see what that impact would be. So through that, we went through and been able to do and have the survey. So
Kevin, can I just interject one thing, especially for Ray and Eric? One of the things that the doctor told us when she made her presentation was that there's hardly any research about younger kids and sleep stuff. So that's one of the reasons why we decided to partner with her and Rush to do the survey, to find out.
Yep. So what I'm going to provide here are the caveats, with being just the general impressions for all of the data that was submitted. So this would be for everybody submitted, not just for 75. And you're going to see some themes as you go through here. I know you've had this, so you've had a chance to read it. So my role is really to try to help point out what are some of those themes as we go through these. So first and foremost, overall, it did go faster, didn't it?
Just
Sure, I
one.
saw that.
I thought
Yeah,
it.
there we go. Looks so quick, I didn't.
See, it went that quick. All right, we're going to start on page 3 then. All right, Anna, I'll hand it over to you. So one of the first things we saw was certainly that there was a low response rate for the survey that was available for all of our families. The second thing was the individuals that did respond, it was not reflective of our community as far as our demographics. And then we also had some families that identified as having more than one child in the school system, yet the data that they provided was for a child. So there was other children in their family that weren't accounted for. And then the majority or more representation was from students that attended District 120. Fine. So the impressions themselves, this is a theme you're going to hear through all the buildings as we go through them. First and foremost, bus routes and times, they need to be adjusted. Secondly, the arrival is too early and then routes taking too long. So it's about the amount of time the students on a bus, and then once they get dropped off, of how long they're in the building prior to starting school. Response earlier start time for younger students was mixed, which I think is one of the things that we heard last March when we went through this process. And then there was a general belief about younger students could tolerate earlier start times. And I think the thing for us that I would keep echoing, and Doctor, you can speak up too, please, and if you want to come up here and elbow me if I've got something wrong, we've got to remember the response rates are low. So this is information. We can't say there's anything here that we'd say is statistically significant, right? That would help lead it, but it at least gives us more information than what we had a year ago. So additional general impressions. One of them is the lack of flexibility with the families in their jobs to be able to move at the end of the day primarily. The other one is the later start time for older students was generally favored. And then when you go down to the bottom, parents are assuming if we start later, that means students will be getting out later than what they normally do, which may or could impact their after-school activities. And that's another theme that you're going to see as we go through each of the buildings individually as well. So one of the things on the next page then is the family data. There was 552 unique families, so there wasn't anything that was duplicate for them. So when you talked about the flexibility piece on that last page with the jobs, the next part here, just laying out times, you get a general sense of the work schedule for our families that did respond. Right, so you have 55% of them are ending work between 4 and 6 p.m. Then the next one deals with the flexibility of work times. And when you look at that one, you look at have some flexibility or stay at home, which there would be an assumption made that there's some flexibility still. You're still talking there's potentially 64% of the respondents had some type of flexibility available in regards to the end times for the day. One of the things that we did consider and we did have come to us before was about childcare. And in the feedback that we had, it was approximately 25% said a time change would impact childcare. And then I think the next page, when we go to that one, helps understand. I think we think of childcare a lot of times, we think of the financial burden, and that was one of the concerns that we did have as a school district. At least with the respondents here, 10 of them said there would be a financial impact, which personally I found that surprising because I thought it would have been higher than that. But 80% did say no change. And I think some of that you'll see in the reflection as you went through the packet that they think families have done a nice job or they do the best they can with working with neighbors, family members, or somebody else to help support within the family structure. And that's an assumption on my part. I'm not saying that that's what came up there. So then the next part, as we went through it, as you looked at that, there was the qualitative feedback piece. So in there, I'm not reading all those. It's too small for most of us to probably read, including me, but I do have a couple highlighted areas for us. So on the first bullet point, again, most respondents supported generally a later start time. That was one of the things that came out of there. And they suggested that the minimum for K2 be the earliest. And I think one of the things that you look at research, some of it reads right, you want to try to start no earlier than 8 o'clock. 8 to 8:30 is probably ideal, and then start moving from there. That's one of the things I think we had heard as feedback also prior to getting the feedback here. You go down to the third bullet point, and it talks about parents preferring to the later start times for the older students. There's the part about getting out too late again. That's the common thread that you'll see, that they want to make sure the end times are being consistent with where they are now. And then the last bullet point refers back to families with their need to be able to modify changes to the evening schedule and feeling there might not be some flexibility to that. And the changing of the evening schedule really relates to what it would be in order to be able to get the child or student to bed at a reasonable time. So building specific is next. The two that we really dug into were Washington and Mechanics Grove. In this entire process, even last year, Mechanics Grove probably has the least amount of change when you talk about their schedule. Washington, though, is the one that does have probably the most significant change to where we do get more feedback from our families. So when we went through, able to look at the data, pulling it out, we had 94% of the parents were responsible for getting their children to bed on time. Where'd that page go? So that was the one that I'd ask us to keep looking at as we go through here. The second one that I'd say is looking at 83% of the students do eat at home. So that to me gives some information. What's the morning routine like? Are most of the students trying to come eating before they get to school, or do we need to start making sure we're preparing and having something available for our students in the morning? So then the next part really looking is what's going on before school, trying to find about busing. So when you look at busing, for the respondents, 42% said they ride the bus, 45% said they drive their child. The other was walkers ride, pretty much walkers would take their bikes. When you look at our busing stats at Washington, approximately 65% of our families or our students are eligible to ride the bus. So that gives you an idea of the potential for more people to take the bus. And I think what that shows you is we have more families that are driving their children to school. And that might be due to circumstances over the last couple of years. We might go back up and see more of that ridership in the next year. Time will tell. With the Washington data, just one of the things to point out for you so that you are aware. Washington, we did get the most feedback on that one. We had over almost 25% of the students in the buildings, families respond. So I'm not saying 25% of the families, it's 25% of the students that are in the building. That was our highest return rate on the survey. So when you look at the data then, as we talk about sleep patterns, so trying to find out what's a range, right? We're looking for that number that we think where we can still put a bell schedule together that still can be supported by our families to be able to allow our students to get the least appropriate amount of sleep. So when you start looking at some of this data, I think you go down to the fourth bullet point, at least 85% of the students or families that responded to their children go to bed by 9 o'clock. And now this is for grades K through 2. On average, school time, they wake before 7. And then according to what they're reporting, their child has approximately 10.42 hours of sleep for the respondents. In the bottom, 96% of the respondents said the child has at least 9 hours of sleep. So there's another one that I'm asking you to keep thinking about the 9 hours, because we were trying to find a range for what we thought for hours that we could do and provide flexibility. And you're going to see some common themes as you go in even into Mechanics Grove. So the next one, after school, trying to see what's the impact for after school. So if the time changes or moves, 38% said they take the bus. So that is a decrease than from what we'd seen earlier. So there's something going on where either they're getting picked up or they're walking maybe to somebody's house, but that's a decrease in the number. If school ended earlier, which I could use the clicker for that because I won't move the slide. This one, if school ended earlier, 43% would take the bus. So you see an increase. Only 44% would be driven. So trying to find out what's the amount of people that would end up taking the bus is the whole point of being able to show that. So if you go to the next slide. So Washington, the qualitative piece here, kids are usually more alert in the morning than older students. Common theme that came out. The hesitation, which we heard last March, already dark when kids get on the bus, and that's in the morning. So the concern is wanting them to be able to not have that take place. Kids can't manage themselves, need more sleep, no flexibility to get home earlier. All right. So that was one of the feedbacks that we had there summarized. And schools that ended earlier, then again, would end up needing additional childcare and expenses. So it's where you're trying to look at, and you go back, what was this? We had roughly 25% said impact, 10% said financial impact. Up here, flexibility with getting home earlier. It's where you guys start looking at the numbers. And I think that's the difficult part of all of this as you look through this. That's why we're trying to give you the full picture of what we're seeing as feedback. So the next few bullets have the impact on family and routines. That was probably one that we're seeing right here. So right there, you're seeing that as a pattern. So we as a school district, as we look to do a modification, we need to say, what are we doing to support our families with helping to try to make that modification and support them in this process? Again, pushing evening routines later. So they're talking about start times again. If they're late, they're getting out later. It means they're getting home later, which means they're starting their routines later. So the point being, and it sounded redundant, but we had to look at what we were doing for an end time for our buildings. Here's part difficult to assess without a bus route at times. So one of the things we needed to do and why we're here tonight is to be able to say, here's the bus times that we're looking at, we think we can work with. I think one of the things that you have a board is that if we're making some changes, we need to give our families enough time to be able to make those adjustments. And we think by being able to do this now, knowing that we started to talk about this in last March, that we've provided enough time for at least people who have been thinking about this, and it should be in the back of their mind that how to plan ahead. So here, this last bullet, one comment was about earlier start times may decrease the morning stress, but it may increase afternoon stress. So I think it's a caveat to think about. And really, I think that probably, in my opinion, talks about the level of participation that you see students in, and then probably some of the needs that the families have, and in order to be able to meet the needs, if they need to get their children to different places. So that is Washington. Mechanics Grove. So if you look at Mechanics Grove, you'll see a similar layout for the presentation. Mechanics Grove, 92% of the parents help set the bedtime schedule. The difference is Washington was at 94, very close. When you talk about, the last one I looked at was eating breakfast, 84% eat at home. When we're talking about Washington, that number was 83. When we talk about the data and how we got this with response rates, Mechanics Grove was our second highest. So there's 106 of our students out of the 505 families that actually responded, of the students. So that put it at 20.9%. Slide. So going back to the bedtimes, so looking at school nights, the average time for people typically falling asleep for our students was right around 9 o'clock. 72% are falling asleep by 9. At Washington, that was at 85. You talk about the school days, what's going on? 9.5 hours, 9.7 hours of sleep was the average duration. At Washington, that number was 10.4. And then the very bottom, 93% of the students were getting at least 9 hours of sleep, where at Washington, that was at 96. So when it comes to using the bus number is much higher at Mechanics Grove, probably due to location. Mechanics Grove is at 64% of the respondents said they utilize the bus, and 90% of the students at Mechanics Grove are eligible to ride the bus. So that's a big difference, whereas Washington, it was at 42% versus 69 eligible. So when you look at that, you see similar rates as far as who's being driven, definitely a lot less, which you would anticipate. And the two that I haven't really mentioned was down here is about Rec Connect. That was added on there because that's the service where, bless you, if families needed to use it before or after daycare service, we're trying to find out who was utilizing the Park District already. And as I think we would expect, the numbers were pretty low for that, for the families that were utilizing it. But that would be an avenue that we would look to see. Can we explore it and make that more available for our families? Slide. So after school, the number stayed pretty consistent with 65% still taking the bus home. Whereas at Washington, that number went down to 38. And then the school ended earlier, 70% would take the bus home. That's an increase from what we've seen before. So it's an increase definitely from here. And it's also different than what Washington is. Washington was at 43%. And again, you get down here about Rec Connect. So I think the thing that stood out here is the acknowledgement. Once students start getting to 3rd through 5th grade, there's acknowledgement they're starting to become more homework. The activity levels definitely starting to increase for these grades.
Howard, can I ask a quick question? When
You may.
asked whether a change would result in a change in their bus ridership, did you give any parameters, like if it would change by a half hour, 10 minutes, 5 minutes?
No, we didn't get that specific. The question wasn't that specific.
Just curious.
Qualitative data for MG. So here's the themes you're gonna start hearing. Bus pickup, too early. Children picked up an hour before and on a bus for an hour. Second part, parents with the flexibility. And then greatest concern, later start time would deter families from participating in activities after school because they wouldn't get out early enough. Agreed or aligned. One of the thoughts prefer to align, youngest starting the earliest, oldest starting the latest. And then they do not want to change at the detriment of the younger siblings, which is part of the reason why we are here, because we're trying to see what we could do to best balance out the difference between kindergarten all the way up through, for our sake right now, 8th grade. Then the last one, Sandberg, we didn't go through all the exact numbers that were on there within the data because we felt with Sandberg, my opinion, we knew the older students and what the impact was there, that most people were looking at that as, yes, that made sense based off of the research that's been out there for the 20+ years. But I think you'll still see some commonality from what we've heard earlier. So current start time's too early, bus time, bus pickup too early. Activities that start at 4 p.m. So it'll negatively impact if we change the schedule, if they have something that begins at 4. And late start and end creates childcare problems for younger siblings who would be cared for by middle school siblings after school. So one of the things is, I saw that comment or statement, it made me think, where are we with that now? So even in our current bell schedule, the way it stands right now, our older students are getting on the bus and going to school before their siblings that are younger, meaning K-5. And typically, our older students are getting home maybe exactly when they do or after they get home. So that's one of the areas that we're not able to address this at all, really, in our current model to support our families. So I think that's another thing. We looked at putting together this proposal to come to you tonight. One of the items we'll be able to address at least the morning portion for our students. So one of the things that we knew and we discussed last March was busing. T was able to present to you today the extension that we're able to do. And part of that process was we were able to work with the bus company well in advance to look at different schedules. So in doing so, one of the things that we're looking to be able to do, what we estimate, we're looking at potential a net zero increase. And there could be flexibility in there for a route or two that if we see routes are taking too long, might have some flexibility to actually increase the routes to decrease the ridership or duration for our students that are on the bus. And that would also mean we're trying to get our students to the building in a more reasonable hour to where they have enough time if they need to eat breakfast, they would be available, but then to get to class to where there isn't as long of a time where they're sitting waiting to be able to go to school. One of the ideas that we did come together on as an admin group and talking through this was, let's look at having our Washington and Mechanics Grove routes combined. That's one of the reasons this is possible. And this also adds a different benefit because we'd still drop off at Washington. So one of the things is, we have siblings that are in both buildings. It's approximately 125 students, I believe, are in both buildings, which comprises almost of 20% of the students between Washington and Mechanics Grove. So they can have a sibling with them. That does a couple of things. You have a sibling going out to the bus stop with them. So hopefully that's helpful. 2, on the bus, you have now role models because they've been through the process of riding a bus. They are able to help our younger students with understanding how to ride the bus and helping with able to exit off the bus, because just while we're looking to get our kindergartners acclimated to getting on the bus, it's still helpful to have some older role models to work with younger students getting off the bus. The second thing is, by doing that, you've decreased the number of routes that a bus company needs to go through the neighborhood. Reason being, before they went through the neighborhood for Washington, drop off, then they went through the neighborhood for Mechanics Grove, went and dropped off. Now we're able to be what I'd say is more efficient within an age groups that I think which are still appropriate. Go through that subdivision one time or that area, be able to pick up all the Washington and Mechanics Grove students and be able to do the drop offs. So here's where we are right now. We put in there as a reminder, these are our current school times. So hopefully you're able to write down between the two, because I'm not going to be able to toggle that quick between the two without skipping about 4 pages for you. The key part really here for you is, of the two, Washington's the one that's changing the most, or the recommendation is to change their schedule the most at this time. With Sandberg's also changing, but I'd say it's not termed as the biggest change because I think more people are understanding of why that would take place. Mechanics Grove is staying pretty consistent. So next slide. Here we go. So what we were looking at, this changed a little bit from what we did propose last March, in the sense that we did combine the routes for Washington and Mechanics Grove. One of the other concerns we had was about the pickup times. So we're looking at earliest being 7 o'clock, whereas before we were talking about potentially 6:45, so at least 15 minutes. But right now, the way it's set up and what we're getting from our bus company is the earliest would be 7. And that we know we'd also, for at least roughly 26% of our students, because it's 260 out of the 975 students are siblings between the two buildings, should have somebody else there with them at the bus stop. Was to be able to have Washington have the earliest pickup time, really Washington Mechanics Grove at 7. Washington would start at 7:50. We did increase that time a little bit, knowing that we are trying to get as close to 8 o'clock as possible for our families. And then have an end time of 2:30. So what that means for our families is the current end time for Washington is later. So that is an impact for them, where right now they end at 3. They start at 8:45. So it's a 55-minute difference in the start time is what we're asking for our Washington families. But we were able to decrease the end time a little bit. And I will say one thing is we've worked through this process that we've all been pretty good about. These times are still flexible somewhat because we are still, not only for our district of 75 working with negotiations, we are also negotiating still in 120. Plus we're still fine tuning anything that we have with the bus company. But we do know these are in the ballpark and would be able to work. So when I say ballpark, you're talking maybe 10 or 15 minutes. But our goal right now is that definitely doesn't go any lower. Both of those. So we look to be able to do that for having Washington. And the way we were trying to get to the number, so I go back to those sleep patterns. In both cases for Washington and Mechanics Grove, we knew over 90% of our families or our students were getting at least 9 hours of sleep. So at least there's a benchmark. And if you look at the research, it goes anywhere from roughly 9 to 11 hours is that time, that amount for sleep. So when you look at this and you consider the amount of ridership we had on buses versus walkers, you start thinking about how much flexibility do we have for our students with sleep. So for the scenario for both schools, we know majority of the students, at least from the respondents, have reported that they're in bed by 9. If our students are able to go to bed by 9 and they get up at 6, minimally, there's 9 hours. Plus that still gives 50 minutes for morning routine for families. So where that gets flexible, a little more flexible, that's for the students that we know are picked up right at 7, which isn't everybody. It's a subdivision. So what we're looking at is that late time would get later. So you potentially have just minimum. If students went to bed at 9, there's probably times where they're going to sleep at 6:20, 6:30, where that time starts increasing. Now, we know at both schools, at least what's reported, it's approximately what we've seen, around 40% are able to at least be driven, or another 11 to 13% approximately walk, more at Washington. So you do see some of the flexibility there for families, meaning if they did go to bed later, they certainly could sleep until, so you could have somebody go to bed at 10, sleep to 7. You still then have a minimum of 50 minutes to get to Washington with a morning routine. And then you have another 10 minutes added on to that, a full hour, roughly an hour, 5 minutes to get to MG. So I think when we're looking at this, start talking about it, you're looking at some of those timeframes. We know there's at least a minimum of 9 hours there. We would be asking our families if children do need or want a little more sleep time, that would impact with how they need to be able to modify the sleep times for when their children do go to bed. And that's where we need to look, say, how can we help support with doing that? So those two are the biggest changes. Then with Sandburg, Sandburg's time, well, MG, they would go to 8:05 as far as the start time for next year for school. They currently start at 8:15. They end at 2:30, and next year we would propose that they end at 2:45. Carl Sandburg, they currently start at 7:45. What we'd like to see is for them to start at 8:50. They currently end at 2:41. And what we'd want to do is have them end at 3:35. And one of the key parts here is when we look at the end times, at least for 2 out of the 3 here, we're able to manage keeping the end times pretty consistent. In talking with Mr. Pilot, when we talked about activities, we were thinking about clubs and activities that take place at the school. Does that end time still allow for them to be able to go to those activities? And we talk about athletics and stuff. And we believe, yes, that does still provide the flexibility to go there unless something starts right at 4. So we did try to maintain where we were looking at for end times to be consistent, where we felt it still give families time to be able to have the children get to other activities that they may have planned outside the day. So with that, next slide. Next steps as we go through this. First, parent support meetings about sleep habits. We have April 27th as one of those parent meetings where we'll be having parents come in and we'll start talking about this a little bit more. I think for us as a school district, what I'd like to be able to do, in talking with Nicole about how we can continue to partner with Rush. To me, this is a work in progress. What I'd like to be able to see us do is establish a fall and spring time for us to again gather additional information from our families. Next year, how is this process working? Look at what the survey data a little bit different. Maybe have a focus group come in and get more feedback. So that if we need to make any changes, we can do that and bring them back to you no later than the April board meeting of next year or the March, depending on where we are with our data. We're working with our bus company. As far as the partnership with District 120, had a similar presentation with them last Tuesday, a week ago, and their start time would be just before Sandburg's. But I've asked, they'll be taking a vote in April of whether that data approve it going forward. So with that, questions do you have? All right.
My first question is our start time and all of these proposals contingent on the high school adopting that? So if we were to adopt and approve everything you're bringing today as a recommendation, and the high school decides to stick with their current schedule or not adopt a new schedule, what impact does that have on us? If we are combining Washington and MG as far as buses, are we now sharing Sandburg and the high school?
So anytime the two districts decide to do something differently, there's an impact, yes. So I don't know the exact number of routes we're sharing, but it would impact it, yes.
So even if we adopt it, that they don't, we would have to probably reevaluate because as I recall from last year, for the other board members, I recall it being about a $440,000 swing that if we were to independently do something apart from the high school, that was how much extra it was going to cost us.
Yep.
And I imagine that would impact everybody's vote. So that's just something I'd like to know. I know we can't do everything exactly in tandem, especially with different board meeting dates, but just information to have.
Yep.
I didn't catch, I looked at all the materials and I saw all the start times, but I guess I missed the part that MG and Washington would be sharing buses. So the thing that comes to mind, it doesn't personally impact me, but I know it would impact some people in my subdivision. If we are one of the subdivisions that live just underneath the bus route cutoff for Washington, such that we have to walk, but it really is too far to walk in the morning when you have to get to work, so you drive. But we are in the busing for MG. So if you now have those similar bus pickup times for MG, but you don't have a bus rider for Washington, now you have to go be in the pickup line to drop off at Washington at the same time you need to get your MG student to the bus. Again, doesn't impact me, but I can think of people on my street that could apply to, that I just want to make sure that's being looked at in the bus routes, because like you said, a far higher percentage of students are bused to MG that are not eligible because of just the makeup of the neighborhood surrounding Washington. That there's a good portion of the neighborhood around Washington, they're all walkers or drivers. And that just needs to be made sure, because I could see, especially a family that might have 3 or 4 young kids, can't be in 3 places at once, especially if there's only one caregiver there in the morning.
Okay.
I looked as though, and you don't need to go back to the table, but with the proposed start time at MG and Washington. So if Washington started at 7:50 and MG starts at 8:05, that's a 15-minute swing. So if you have a bus that has some Washington kids on it and MG kids, it would seem as though those MG kids are gonna sit on the bus for a lot longer in order to drop them off there. And is that enough time to get them dropped off, the Washington kids dropped off and exit the bus at Washington and still get over to MG when there's only a 15-minute swing between their start times?
That's what the bus companies tell us, yes.
Okay.
Because they're not just getting dropped off right at the end of
Right.
the time, so there's a little flexibility there for it. But yes, they are. And I think one of the things, Christie, as we looked at this was being able to get from Washington to MG. And the critical part was we don't have the traffic now with Sandburg and the high school.
Right.
So the buses will be able to move.
And I promise that's a significant, because I do that every morning between Sandburg and MG trying to get, or the high school, trying to get two kids there at the same time. That's difficult, but we do it most days. Okay, and then as a parent who took the sleep study for 3 of my kids, the survey, I will say, when the question that talks about will there be a financial impact for if we go from one to the other, it didn't really break down whether that would be a positive impact or a negative impact, because, and again, my child's moving up to MG, this is not even an impact, but if we were, just my family does not use Rec Connect in the morning, but if we were to move it up, but I used to when I had 2 kids over there and a baby, whatever, but had we had an earlier start time, that actually, at that point in time, would have helped me, because then I wouldn't have had to pay for Rec Connect in the morning. Whereas when I had 2 kids going to Rec Connect in the morning, I rearranged our schedule so that we didn't have to pay for it, because that was a financial impact. So in my case, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, I'm just using myself as an example, it would have been a benefit so that I wouldn't have had to pay for morning Rec Connect with an earlier start time. And I was, no matter what, I was still paying for afternoon Rec Connect. So whether I was paying, whatever time they get out of school, I was dealing with after school anyway. So for some families, and I noted when I filled it out, it didn't capture families like mine, which the financial net may not have been an impact, because if I wasn't paying for one, I'd be paying for the other. But it actually would have helped, because if I was already paying for the one, it actually, that was just a comment for if future focus groups or whatever are dealt with.
To clarify.
Because
maybe
Rec
there's a
Connect,
positive
yeah,
there,
you can do AM and PM, some days, whatever. So that wasn't, it was, Rec Connect was kind of in one bucket. And it didn't differentiate between AM and PM in all of those circumstances. So I just point that out. So that financial impact part may not have been entirely indicative of everyone's situation,
Got it.
but
Good point.
and then the other last one, and then everyone else can talk, sorry, I promise. Eating breakfast at home, when it said, I think that would, under the current schedule. But again, that's not capturing, I know a number of teachers who get their kids up early in the morning at 6 a.m. to go to Rec Connect because they have to be at school. So for them, it doesn't matter whether we're starting school that time or they're still having morning daycare because they have to be at their jobs, whatever it is. And their kids are eating breakfast at there, but that wasn't really an option. Like, do they eat it at Rec Connect? Do they eat it at school? Do they eat it at home? Because I mean, this year, for example, with the food services for breakfast and lunch not being paid for, if you were starting earlier, but depending on how that's going, that helps a lot of families and would have maybe helped and served more families if more people were coming earlier at breakfast time than right now when Washington starts at 8:45. By then, most kids have already eaten because they get up early, doing that. So those are just things that I think would all be positively impacted in some ways to counterbalance some of the sleep things that you're saying. I'm not discounting any of the things that you've brought up, but I just wanted to point that out and the route thing, just making sure. That's okay.
Well, you've lived through it, so.
Last year. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions, feedback? Yes, sir.
So I'm just curious. You said there was a low response overall. You said that some families responded for some kids even though there were more.
Mhm.
So conversely, they will respond for all of them in some families.
Mhm.
And the number you show is 552 family responses.
Mhm.
So what percentage then would you say from the total population, the school population, to the 552 that responded? Would you say we've gotten in terms of response?
So this was actually a conversation that Cole and I were having. I don't think, to her point, I don't think we can focus so much on the families as it is the number of students that were actually comprised of that amount. And I think we look at that, the percentage was, it was roughly, Washington was 25% of the population. Mechanics Grove was at 21% roughly, and Sandburg was 19%. So you're talking about roughly 21% of our student population provided input on this survey. Well,
And about 10% of the families reported more than one child, but only reported data for one of their children.
So does that skew any of these results?
Well, I think it goes back to the beginning. I think we can't really use all of it to base what we're doing it. I think it gives us information to kind of use as a guesstimate, for sure.
So the other point, and this went out to all the families,
Yes, sir.
and only, what, 21% respond?
Approximately.
However, historically, when we have done other surveys, like the one, what is the one that just went off, the skills,
The 5 essentials.
thank you, 5 essentials. We have notoriously low response rate for, unless we're asking about COVID protocols. We have a notoriously low response rate across the district to any surveys. I think I was surprised to hear that 21% responded, because I would have expected actually less than that based on previous things. So that's just something to keep in mind. Well, people should be doing it more for whatever reason people.
Well, I guess the other way you could look at it, there's a low response of 21%. The other side of the argument could be that there's 80% positive response, that they're good with it.
By not responding, maybe, yeah.
Another issue is that we didn't get any sense of what the degree of change was going to be. So I think most of them are even estimating what's going to really the impact on families. A 10-15 minute change in one direction or the other, we have less of an impact than an hour change. So that kind of specificity wasn't available when families took the survey, and they may have different responses. And that's why I think looking at it over time, and then looking at how much the times changed versus the impressions of the impact on families based on that degree.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So the Washington school schedule has a significantly earlier start time, but ends just half an hour early. What's the impact going to be on lunchtime and snack time during the school day?
Stephanie?
We're going to try to go back to what was normal pre-COVID and run it from 11 to 12:30. Snack time will depend on what specials are and all that kind of thing, but our current plan is to go back to pre-COVID times of 11 to 12:30. And eliminate the 10:30 brunch and the 1 o'clock.
We have that. So.
think it's challenging to make a decision based off the low number of response rates. But considering what Ray talked about is no responses is maybe a positive, kind of affirming that, you're not giving your input. But aside from the response, if I ask myself, what's best for the students, and I, fall back on the research, there is research that suggests the later start time is better for the older students. There's research that suggests the 9 hours of sleep is, ideal for our younger students. And if we can maintain that with the younger students and, also use research to support the older students, those are positives that we can fall back on.
One of the things I said anecdotally to Kevin in our agenda meeting was, is if you ever are on Orchard at like 8 o'clock in the morning, they're already starting to line up. The parents are already starting to line up to drop off kids and
Somebody
driving
did
down
that.
that street. So I was feeling like, well, the start time's not that much earlier than all those cars are lined up already, so.
They'll be dropping them off on time.
And I also thought it was really interesting about some of the schools, about how many parents drove their kids. I don't think that, that sort of takes some of the early bus and travel bus time, that sort of takes that out of the equation, because the one school is like 54% or something, wasn't it? Yeah, driving their kids to school. I mean, that makes a difference, I think.
I think we got a plan for those bus rates, number of riders to go up going into next year.
All right, any other questions or comments? So I just want to warn you, or just let you know that this is an action item on our agenda. And so really, we have two choices. I mean, what Kevin was saying is that, we've been talking about this since March, although not all of us were here for that. When we've been doing the sleep study and Dr. came and everything. So I think we'd like to try to approve it tonight, but obviously that's the decision that the board needs to make. The other option would be to table it, until next month. But I mean, I feel like this is one of those things we've been talking about it for a long time. And we have the data, as small a number as it is, but that's the data we have. So just sort of keep that in your mind as we get to action items later in the meeting.
Can I ask a comment on that?
Yeah.
If we were to pass it, but then the high school doesn't, we can still then bring it back up as an agenda item. We're not stuck with it, because that would obviously significantly impact the financial impact and how we're planning to do things. But that shouldn't stop us from proceeding with whatever we would like to do, under the assumption the high school will be passing it. And if they don't, we can then bring it up in discussion next month.
One of
correct?
the things I was thinking about when you were talking about, like some of driving kids to Washington and then kids taking the bus to MG, didn't we talk about that there will still be some bus routes that just go from a neighborhood to one school? Or is that not true?
There would
I
have to
guess
be.
potentially there could be. Right, because I think some of the scenarios like
Right.
Chris you brought up where they're too close and you need to walk to Washington.
I mean, anyone that
bus
lives
to
around
MG.
Washington would not qualify for busing to Washington, but would definitely qualify to MG.
Right.
So there would have to be some of
Some.
those, and that's where I was thinking of Hanover, because
And then I'm thinking,
There are a number of
if there is a bus route like that, then that would probably pick up anywhere near 7 o'clock.
right,
And you might,
Correct.
or sorry,
you're right.
so
early,
you'd have, you
right.
might have time to
Going later.
do both of those.
And that's, I just wanted to make sure when they were touting the benefits of the sibling role models and whatever, that's only going to apply in some subdivisions, because some, you're gonna have that, and just be mindful of then when you're setting those routes, because those families are gonna be having to, how can I have a kid at Washington that I have to drop off, and a kid I have to stand at the bus stop for at the same time? That's going to be a challenge, and we can anticipate that, so I'm just making sure. But I that is not to criticize what is being put out there, because I know we have been talking about it. I know, to Eric's point, the research overwhelmingly supports this for the older kids. And I do tend to feel like people will adapt. Nobody likes change, but I think that this is a positive overall that I think we've been working towards and trying to tweak and get the right way, so that we weren't making a haphazard change. That doesn't mean it'll be perfect out the box, but
And it's for you as a board, if you wanted to your point, Chris, you say, going to tonight, maybe the motion could, you have to add lib a little bit, saying, decide to go forward, approve it with the contingency, if you wanted, that 120 approves also. Or I'll just bring it back, whatever you're most comfortable with.
So if the kids to MG go a little earlier, Kevin, where are we gonna put them all in that building?
It's funny you should ask. Why don't we have the next topic come on up?
Did you guys rehearse that?
We did
Like
not.
what Santa does.
Yes, what jokes.
Although I would say, like, you're gonna have to put them somewhere, whether they come early or on time or late, but you know.
So in October, T came to you and we started to talk about what we were going to do as a district as part of the process to look at where our capacity was at all of our buildings and looking at our enrollments. We had a study done by Rolf Campbell, which is something that we do periodically every 3 to 5 years to find out where we see our projections for enrollment coming in. And then be able to see if we have pressure points. And the pressure points, an example we've talked about this evening a little bit. We knew 3 years ago, we had a large kindergarten class. Well, that kindergarten class is now in 2nd grade. It's hard to believe time's passed that quickly. They're gonna be going to 3rd. And that's one of the reasons why it triggered what we're doing. I know. So tonight, we're bringing this back to you. We originally thought we were gonna be doing this in April, but knowing of kind of where things are going, we want to try to get back to you as soon as possible. So that could help with the planning process for ourselves and to be able to make sure our staff at MG know what we're doing. So first few slides are going to be what you've seen already from the previous meetings.
Refresher.
Huh?
It's a refresher.
It's a refresher, yes. So going back, we first did this back in October and we've done a number of steps to get to this point right now. So next slide. If you remember back in October, what we looked at were the enrollments that were projected. These lines are from the Rolf Campbell study survey. This was back in October. And the blue has been more of our projected line of the actual numbers of what we've seen. This was this year. And what we're seeing is tentatively looking at a slight decrease coming in for the 22-23 school year at that time. So of significance right there, you're talking about earlier, how many students have come in? T and Sarah shared with you what we had been, our projection right there at that time, when we met with you was 1,512. We're right now at roughly 39 when we did that. So it shows you what the increase is because it's the question you had. So next slide. So what we did is also make sure kind of where have we been historically on our enrollments again, kind of figuring out where we are. So the high water mark was in school year 18-19. We actually had 541 students at the time at MG. So I think that's at the time when we had them up on the roof. We probably had them out in the back. And then the low water mark was really going back to this 21-22 year. We started out at 502 right here. So really just look at the trend line. So you get some consistency. This is our predictions going forward based off Rolf Campbell, what you just saw, hopefully in a better visual for you. The orange is where we're looking at our estimates based off the numbers we have in our schools, right? Rolling them up. The gray, that's the low water mark Rolf Campbell predicted for MG. The important part of this is we generally try to see if there's a kind of a similar trend where if it's going down consistently, we're seeing something similar or whatnot. You can see our numbers are not aligning real well with what Rolf's telling us from where they're projecting stuff. The unique part, this is the first time that we've seen where in school year 26-27, it actually has this almost exact same number. So just for reference, what I'd look at, let's look at these next 3 years, I think is our focus.
What is going on at 26?
So that 2nd grade class goes to
Yeah.
Denver.
Yeah, well, they're out, and then what we're talking about right now, we have some lower kindergarten classes, so they're coming out. So next slide. So what we did is come to you and wanted to go through the site review and what we were able to find out through that time, and this is just focused on MG. Historically, we had about 4 less students per class than what we've normally seen. When you look at our Illinois school report card, we were generally right around that 25 number. And then once the pandemic came around, our average class sizes, according to school report card, went down to 22 for these last 2 years. So we were a little bit lower. we wanted to look at how we're utilizing our rooms. Because we've done, what I'd say is a priority of looking at when we can bring classes back into the building, like from CETO. Because I think we believe and we know we're the best people to be able to educate our students. So we wanted to make sure how we're utilizing our class space, because it's changed over time. So we were able to do that, to be able to find out what can we do next. Next slide. So when we did that, we came back to, and this is what we reported. We said some of the options that we would look at were looking at bumping up the class size a little bit, being able to look at maybe holding or delaying, bringing in back any of our students that have IEPs, working through CETO, and maybe looking at specials, being on carts. Next slide. Based on what we tentatively knew, we provided, here's options for the board to consider back in October. So this wasn't a surprise of doing something permanent or doing something temporary. And to be able to, so you could see the cost differential. I can tell you one of the fun things, and Dave will share it with you. It's really interesting to see how things have changed with construction costs in the past few months. Not for the better.
Yeah, I was gonna say, absolutely.
Next slide, please. So when we finished that part with you and the board, providing that information, we then went out, we had a meeting with the MG faculty, provided the same presentation that we did to the board back in October. They'd actually composed a Google document where they would put all their questions down that they had or give us insight on what they were experiencing. And then T also went back and met with the building leadership team to get more input and just kind of hearing what's going on. From a board standpoint, you did a tour, you went through the building, saw what was going on, talked to many of the teachers that were working out of closets. You saw the band equipment in the hallway, you saw the tables in the hallway for lunch. So trying to make sure everybody was on the same page of seeing what was going on. Next slide. So what we did then admin-wise, gathering that information, looking at the questionnaire, there were themes. There were a total of 31 questions/statements. That number there totals 26 because some of them were just statements that didn't relate to these, and I didn't want to have a bunch of ones down there. But I think it gives you an idea of what some of the primary pieces of feedback are. A, they did not want to see specials classes put on a cart. That was number one. Second part was the space. And I think the board, you've received emails, we all have, of sharing stories about what the space is like for our staff working with students, where that encompassed not 6 different statements in regards to that. And then the next 2, talking about class size, and then talking about appropriate class space for students with IEPs. And then the last one that I'd point out was staff space, because we know our staff don't have their faculty lounge. So they don't have a place to go sit, relax, kind of decompress, have their own meeting, whatever that they need to do for that time. So that's what we were able to find out from getting that survey done. So when we had that, to Tanya, knowing that, how can we work with this right now with knowing what we know? And Tanya's going to take you through the diagram she has here to at least see what would work.
I have to start by saying I apologize, there's a typo on here. Room 39 is up here. This was from original before we were talking about the possible movement. This is supposed to say special ed, so I apologize. I worked so hard to get it to you so quickly and then I copied it wrong. So basically, just so you get a visual, and I think I gave most of you a map when we were walking around as well, but this is the main entrance here. And so here's the front office, just so you have your bearings a little bit. I want to start, and I know my staff already knows this because we said it yesterday. This is not in no way a final map at all. My process I have done every single year I've been here is go through with my building leadership team. Here's the number of spaces we need for X, for Y, for Z, and we work as a group, as a building leadership team to put all of our label all of our locations in our building. This is simply to show that it can be done. So I just want to make sure that's clear. The highlighting part we'll go over in a little bit, so ignore the highlights right now. But you can see where it says whole class, this would be where one of our grade level classes would be. A 3rd grade room, we're not taking a 2nd grade. A 3rd grade, a 4th grade, or a 5th grade classroom. Mono or dual, whatever it is. Where you see our specials, they will not be on a cart. So I'm going to go through this list here so you can see. I have art still in the same location as of right now, and we have music still in the same location as of right now. PE will still be in the large gym, pending before or after our brunch and dinner times and all of that. The other PE class during the winter months can also go into our small gym. Discovery Den will still take place there, and that's right now currently where like Mrs. Washburn runs our Discovery Den class and kids come for book checkout, et cetera. Then you see other spots where it might say special ed, that's the SPED. You can see that it's labeled in multiple locations. The reason for that is some may be a place for students to receive their social work services. Some might be for their actual instructional learning program, which is the replacement program for math or reading. We have a variety of spaces specifically for that, actually. This, which I'm sorry, that's about a half-size classroom. This is an entire full-size classroom that could be utilized as a full classroom space or split in half, depending on our number of students in our ILP sections. And when we plan our schedule, we always start with special ed. That drives the entire schedule. So we will make sure that they have a location that's suitable to the size that they need for their classroom. So for example, just as an example, there might be a large third grade ILP math class, and I don't know that yet coming in for sure. They would probably have their math time here, and let's say that's from 8:20 to 9:20.
Bill,
Sorry, instructional learning program, it's a replacement program. So those kids actually leave the classroom to receive their replacement math program.
thank you.
Sorry about that. And then maybe there's also a really large fifth grade reading ILP, instructional learning program replacement. They would probably also be scheduled in there because this is our largest space. So that's just an example of kind of how that gets utilized. We also have a space here and we have our staff lounge back. Currently it's the health office because it was large enough to house what we needed with the during heavy COVID time. The hope is that we are well on our way out of there. And so we do have a designated spot for our health office to be and be located with the sink and everything that they need. Our Excels and our LOP, that's these two rooms. These are our self-contained special ed classrooms. So just for your bearings, like here was like where the main office is, and currently it's Mrs. Berto's office, my office, that kind of like in this area. So this is kind of over by that door, just so you can get your bearings for those of you that we did the tour on. Those are classrooms that are currently in place. It's our self-contained special ed classrooms, roughly 5 to 7 students in there with multiple adults, paraprofessionals and classroom teachers, and a lot of our special services that go in there and support social work and speech and everything. We did have a discussion that these classrooms, I talked to them about originally potentially moving over in this area and being more mainstream with our regular education classrooms. But after doing a lot of pros and cons and talking about their location, the bathrooms that don't get used as often, their exit here, access to the playground, all of that, we decided as a team to stay in that location. So that's that part so far. And then to look at potential, can I go on to the next part about? Okay. So our hope then is you can see that this does work, but it is extremely tight. So I know Dr. Myers is going to talk a little bit more about that. Our hope is, as we propose to potentially do a mobile unit for the 23-24 school year, the plan for utilizing that unit would be opportunities that are not impacting students who have struggle or difficulties learning. So it wouldn't be like my intervention space for students. It wouldn't be where any of my students with IEPs and special needs go. Not only because it would be a lot to travel there and we would not be maximizing instructional time, most importantly, but also it might be a location of distraction because it will be through a hallway and into the mobile unit. So the plan then would be, that would be a place potentially used for our band, which is either going to be 5 mornings a week, or it might be 2 full days a week. And right now is located, as you guys saw, in our lunchroom in the mornings, where the whole school can practically hear them. And then also to be utilized for teacher offices and teacher spaces. The other possible opportunities that this is where we'll talk with building leadership team. Again, this is not a decision, but would be something like maybe our PC, which is our project challenge, our enrichment program, potentially there. Or maybe that is somewhere, since band is there, maybe that is where music goes. But again, that's a loss of instructional time. Music is only 25 minutes and they need to travel from art to music to PE and all that. So just some thoughts. Questions?
Can you explain the asterisk? It says,
Oh.
where does that apply to? Which
Okay.
one will be reserved for conference room space?
Sorry about that. So there's a couple options here. I definitely do not want to put a conference room out in a mobile unit because I really don't think it's best for parents to be constantly walking through the school and having to direct them in case there's nobody right there to walk them. So we have a couple of options. If this space here, this is room 15, is one of those step down rooms, which is why it's not necessarily the most potential option because any parent who might be in a wheelchair, or other support needed would have to step down. But this is a one possible location because our Project Challenge coordinator, who's here tonight, Tina, 2 days a week, she's at Washington. And we hold our meetings, our IEP meetings, which is, you know, the special ed meetings, our problem solving meetings, we hold them on Tuesdays, like we hold them 1 day a week. So we would just make sure that the schedule aligns to where Tuesdays or whatever day it is, Mrs. Sheedy's at Washington, and then that room becomes the conference room. The other option is pending hopeful approval of the mobile unit. Our room 6A, which actually originally was created as a band room because it is soundproof, would be our OT and PT office. That's our occupational therapy and physical therapy. They're only at MG 1 to 1.5 days a week or so. So again, we would schedule it around that and we would have a conference table in there. And this is right across from the office, which is really nice too. So we have options. Again, this is where my BLT is amazing. We can problem solve and work through it. So
Thank you. I was just curious. what
Yeah.
that was referring to.
thanks for asking. I'm sorry, I forgot to highlight that.
So is the idea to kind of contain, because I know when we talked, you were looking at the soundproof room for the band, is the idea to kind of contain that, so it's not disrupting either students or teachers? So
Yeah.
when band's in wherever there are, nobody else is in that structure?
I mean, not necessarily that nobody else is in that structure, but I wouldn't want it to just most importantly disrupt instruction that's happening. So we have worked really well. I mean, Mrs. Holk is amazing. She's the 5th grade band director. We've kind of moved her. She was here, then these classrooms were like, and then we moved her here, a little bit away from these classrooms by the music room, by the Mr. Leahy's office, who's our custodian. So we've worked really well with her and she's been really flexible and she understands our concerns as well with space. So my gut feeling is that the best place is out there because it also is closest to our 5th grade classrooms, which 5th graders are the ones in band. So there's a lot of pieces to that make it most conducive, and it's only maybe just mornings, or it's only 2 days a week or something, so it's also not full time that the band is happening in it.
One band room right now would be, I mean, under the old models, you do the large band instruction either in the morning, so it's generally for lessons. that are
It's
during the
lessons,
week.
correct, and she's really enjoyed the larger space in the lunchroom, because she's brought like all of the brass at one time, just to be practicing, so. Yeah. That's questions.
So with what Tina's talking about, the recommendation is going to be to have a mobile classroom for the school. And the question is, no, question is why? Tanya referenced the yellow. Those yellow classes are predominantly the classes that house most of our students, our teachers in teaching. So in looking at that, that's 20 classrooms. Part of what we started to talk about is we're investing as a district a lot into our literacy model. And there's a setup that we really need to try to maintain for a standard classroom. And if we can't do that, then we're not supporting what we've been investing in as a district. So one of the things that came out and talking with Sarah was able to work with Dave and saying, Dave, here's what our ideal classroom should look like if we're going to support what we're doing literacy wise. So Dave went over to MG and started looking through the classrooms, measured them out, went through the dimensions she provided them. And what we said is, if we had to get 26 kids in a classroom, what's that do? So when you multiply 26 times 20, you get 520. Our enrollment estimated for next year is 517. That gives us no flexibility really whatsoever when you talk about classrooms and adding kids. And we know we'll have some students. That's going to happen. The other part that we looked at is we're hedging on nothing else happens with the P word. pandemic. So if we needed to move, everything that you witnessed when you walked that building would be back in place the way it was in the current conditions. And then the final thing that we're looking at is, we had to ask ourselves, is 26 the classroom number you want to be at versus teacher-student ratio? And our belief is no, that we do want to try to keep it lower if we can. And that's why we were able to get some more flexibility with rooms. We want to be able to try to keep the numbers about where they are this year, maybe add a couple students per classroom. Because right now, I mean, we're right around 22. So maybe we're looking at that 24 number, somewhere in that ballpark. But the point being, we're trying to maintain class size, also going through this and knowing that we need some of the flexibility to be able to do that. And knowing that you've been able to walk through and experience it. So that's why we would recommend, and we're bringing the recommendation to you tonight, to be able to put in a mobile unit at Mechanics Grove. Forgot what the next slide is actually.
Kev, before we go to the next slide, could you just, someone really briefly just touch on that ideal classroom setup for our literacy program that you're
Sure.
talking about?
Who do you want? You got it?
I mean, the bottom line is that obviously enough for students to sit, whether it be flexible seating or their desks somewhere for them to have their location, right? Also having some sort of a gathering area, the carpet squares, some sort of open area, so that hopefully we can go back to that kind of like carpet spot that we've been working on. We want to make sure we have a location for our teachers to work with for small group instruction, either one or two of those in a classroom, depending if there's also an EL teacher co-teaching and so on. And have the opportunity for all of those spaces without having too many students, so you're not able to do that.
Thank
you.
And so I'm gonna ask Dave to come up and take us through where we are with classroom, because it shadowed what we thought it might be in the beginning, took us on a roller coaster to get us back to where I think we're even in a better spot than what we originally thought. Dave?
So back in October, we talked about mobile classrooms. Back in October, a mobile classroom, single classroom, $110,000. We're 6 months farther into this. It has doubled in a half. We're at $250,000 per single unit.
Is that rental or purchase?
They have no, that's part of this issue. There are no more rentals out there.
Okay.
So this would be, it would be a lease at an additional $75,000 per year. So what I am proposing, and inside your folders, you have a piece of paper. Anna, you can keep this up though for me. We would put our mobile unit out here. We would put a walkway out to it. The unit that I found, and looked at a lot of them in the last week, we could pick up installed with the skirting, no electric to it. There's still, we're looking at $60,000 for the unit brought in, installed, leveled, skirted, ready to go, minus a lot of the work that it's going to need. If you look at the picture, it doesn't do it a lot of justice. It's a lot prettier when you see it face to face, and I drove out to Joliet Monday to look at it. I walked the whole unit. There was no mold in the unit. Floors need to be replaced, carpet wise. Structure, everything was nice. I didn't see no mold. I didn't see no stains. It has a rubber 25-year roof on it. They will guarantee the heating and air conditioning units on it before they bring it out. They test everything. Total cost for everything, electric brought to it, desks, chair, everything ready to go. We're looking at about 160 to 190,000. We would own this unit now, and it would give us 2 complete full classrooms. Another part of this problem is with the leasing, they couldn't get it to us until end of October. It wouldn't be hooked up and ready till Thanksgiving break. So because of the supply and demand that's out there, we're having some major issues. We could have this one delivered, put together 30 to 45 days. That would give us all summer then to do everything we need to do on it. We have to run electric to it. We have to change the doors out to put panic doors in it. We have to put a fire system into it. We're gonna have to put Promethean boards in. We're gonna have to put desks, carpet, and paint. So that final cost, like I said, would be about between $160,000 and $190,000. It depends on what Tanya and Doctor decide to use it for.
Part of the expense that might come out is if we remove the bathroom and shower.
There is a bathroom and shower in this unit.
MG already has a shower, so we're good.
Right, and the walking distance from the trailer to the bathroom is only about 60 feet.
Right.
So it's not a long distance for a child or parent teacher have to go to.
But that could be another office or something.
It would be 2 complete full classrooms at 900 square feet where we're at. So that would give us areas to put double work areas, a work area for the kids, 26 desks in it, and any shelving cabinets with that we would need for it.
That helps make sense, because when you kept saying 1 unit, I'm thinking is 1 class, based on everything you're saying, is 1 enough?
Well, what that was,
I'm not asking to buy more, but
it was a double, but it was only 50 feet. We would have had to cut that in half, which would have been an expense later for us because we would have had to tear it down and repair it before we were able to give it back. This one, we would own outright. I was on the phone for about an hour today with the ROE. He's gonna send me out an application. We own it. If they feel they can inspect it every year and it's up to par, just like Washington's, we can keep it out there 10, 15 years. We just have to put that on the application. They ask when are we gonna start weaning it out. So we could pick that number. I was with the architect all day today. She's who gave me a lot of these numbers. So these are all ballpark numbers. A lot of these things I'm gonna have to go out for quote for, because a lot of them are over $30,000. The electric's over $30,000. The plumbing, if we would do, it's over $30,000. So that number may change a little bit.
and as I recall from looking, I remember the application thing that we have to renew every few years anyway for the Washington one.
Yes.
It has an end, a projected end time on it that may or may not be the end time we actually utilize it or need it, but
And as long as we maintain them yearly and I get them yearly inspected, they will give us extensions every year. Any questions?
Dave, I have one question. I don't see pilings on this one.
This one is
Dave,
going
I'm
to,
joking.
oh, thank you. Because this one wasn't gonna have that. That would have just blown the cost out of the water.
Board of Education, I'll tell you that story sometime.
And what a story it is. Any questions? I'm asking the board to approve tonight, possibly $200,000. It is gonna come from our fund balance account for this project. Thank you.
more or less than the $23 million buildup.
Yes.
So, it's fine. So I think the thing that we'd look to, and Dave reinforced this, it would come from our fund balance. And then I think one of the things that we keep doing is when we do the capacity reviews, board goes ahead and approves this. We know now we do have a unit that we're able to help alleviate any potential space issues that we have with the buildings.
And one of the things, this thing is 20 feet longer than the average one we would be leasing. So if down the line we do need some more space, we could divide it up into something a little smaller, reading areas, whatever case be.
How mobile is it if it needed to be moved to a different building and we owned it? And is that something that can be done?
It's about $7,000, but could be done, yes.
Maybe follow the second grade to Carl Sandburg.
We're gonna get pilot in the front, we're gonna honk the horn, you're gonna start driving them there.
And then the estimated annual cost, once you have everything set, it would just be normal electric, heating, maybe water and minor sort of
And then
upkeep
yearly
and
maintenance.
repairs.
Being wood, it would probably have to be painted a little bit more frequent than the other buildings, but we're still looking at 8 to 10 years. in between.
Okay, anything else from the board? Okay, thank you.
Oh, insurance costs probably a little. Or is that covered by our listing?
I don't know if we would have an increase to our insurance rates. We'd have to send them the square footage and how it changes, but I don't think it would be significant because our overall insurance coverage is not that high.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is school board policies.
Did I take this one? How about I go with the table of contents, at least what I put together, and we'll start with that.
Okay.
So as we discussed last time, Anna gave me, or gave us, but a full binder of all of the printouts of the policies with the exhibits that are examples of things to look at, but aren't necessarily part of the policy, but they're good reference materials. She gave that to me and I was able to go through and, as we discussed, to kind of divide it into 12, not exactly even, but sections that made sense to me. For example, some of them broke off at the section, so that we're starting the whole new section the next time, rather than getting 1 or 2 policies in and then coming back. That just seemed to make more sense. Ideally, in looking at all of it, it ended up being, we divided it exactly even, it would have been like 33 pages per month that we would be asking everybody on an annual basis to review, or on a monthly basis, but renewing through the whole thing annually, approximately 33 pages. So some of them are a little bit shorter, some of them are a little bit longer in order to make it make sense. So I, with Anna's help, and I revised a little bit, this in your manila folder, there's the policy review section that's sort of a table of contents. This would be for everybody to keep, so that if you wanted to read ahead because you knew you were going to be really busy the next month, but you wanted to go ahead and get through it, to go through it to number 1, as the goal being to familiarize yourself with our policies in general and to educate ourselves and make sure that all of us are on an annual basis going through the entire manual and at least being apprised of what the policies are, number 1. And number 2, if there are any comments, tweaks, changes to discuss, we wanted to put this on the agenda item every month, to kind of go through it and discuss that. So I did not think it made sense to have Anna go to the trouble of making everybody a printed board packet, because I didn't think it was efficient or helpful, and it actually could be more confusing because they're all available in full online on our website, and every time we do the quarterly review with press, it gets updated and changed. If we all had a printed manual, every time we made a change, we'd have to make sure to update everybody's binder to make sure we're all looking at the right ones. And that seems to completely defeat the purpose of having the Press Plus review that we pay dearly for and is convenient utilized. However, for the convenience of all the board members, I have asked that, since each section is approximately 24, 33 pages, each month in our packet, whatever section we're reviewing, that will be made part of our packet so that you don't have to necessarily go scouring the website and finding it, but it will already be there. But I don't know that any of us need to print it out in full in order to go. If that's how you work best to do it, by all means, do whatever you need. But I guess the first thing is everybody in agreement with that, or do you really want a printed binder? Because we can do it. I'm worried it could lead to, well, my page 64 doesn't have that, and then we're.
I'm fine with it being presented the way it was. So it's helpful to have that section available. I did print it out because I like to mark it up, but.
And that's
This was
fine, but at
plenty.
least you wouldn't, you can't be like, next time, I'll do it.
yeah, this
But
was plenty.
having this table of contents, you could keep at your disposal, or I'm sure we can put on the drives, or maybe it's already there and I don't know it, whatever. But whatever it is, I'm sure it's on a drive somewhere that I've sent on it, but I'm sure we'll make it available to us so that everybody can find it. So that if you did want to read ahead, or you had a bunch of time on your hands because, whatever, you could read ahead and do that, or if you had a particular interest. Another thing to note is, I know that from what Freddie has told us, that the finance committee is already going to be looking at some of the fiscal and business policies in section 4, which we would be discussing otherwise at our June meeting. There is going to be some overlap there, but then we can let him take the lead on that month or whatever, because they will already have looked through it. And we will look to him to be the subject matter expert on that one and talk to us if he would like to be. I don't need to.
Yeah.
But this would allow us to, as we talked about, make sure that everybody's apprised and up on it, because otherwise, if we don't make this a part of our annual or our monthly meetings, most of us probably aren't going to otherwise in our spare time sit down and read all the policies. So this is a good way of keeping us all accountable to each other and to the district to make sure that we're all keeping these up to date and aware of it. And we'll make the press policy reviews a lot quicker when we get to that point, because it won't seem overwhelming and daunting because we don't know what we don't know. So with that said, I think the section that we started with is, we kind of started with it last time, but we didn't really give clear directions of what we're looking for. And so I think we all kind of tweaked that last month. So the first section has to do with just the basic, I mean, section 1 really is nothing that needs much.
Do we want to just go policy by policy and just say, does anybody have anything to say on 110?
We can do that.
Whatever.
And I think what we talked about is, I don't think we envisioned making changes. We're kind of keeping a log of what comments everybody's talking about, so that when we get to the next press policy review, we can take a look at it at that point, and if we have any fundamental huge changes, or if we need to ask, you know, the attorney for some feedback on something before we talk about a change, we have some opportunities to do that. Going forward. Do you want to go through?
So we could start with the first one. And school district legal status. Any comments, questions, concerns? Nope. Okay. The next one, 120, district organization, operations and cooperative agreements.
I just had a question on that one. It says, serving educational needs of children in grades pre-K through 8 and others. I was just wondering what the others might entail.
Sorry. I wasn't paying attention.
I was just asking, in this policy 120, it says, serving the educational needs of children in grades pre-K through 8 and others. I was just wondering what others might be.
As others required by school code. And then it's organization operations cooperative. So it'd be any of the cooperative agreements, so when you look
Oh,
through
okay.
those, serving others,
No, serving others, yeah.
right? So you look at what Village of Mundaline, like, so that would be like serving some, what's the agreement there, I would assume?
Yeah, because that was my question. I know we updated this cooperative agreement list, like, I don't know what it was, 6-8 months ago, during one of the press. So my only question was, what do we have a cooperative agreement with Mundaline, Village of Mundaline? Or is that not what that list means?
We do have a good agreement with Mundaline, and one, I think, she might know better than me, but salt. So we do a purchase order agreement with salt, and then we know we do.
So we do
agreements
so
with
services or something.
Service, yeah,
Okay.
snow plowing, paths and stuff like that, we've got agreements between the two of us.
And I remember, I think the
I
Grove was a sporting arrangement or something like that. We were
Yeah.
sharing busing.
That's
to-
true, yes, and wrestle, the wrestling
Wrestling
team.
or
So
something,
wrestling
yeah,
team
yeah.
Diamond Lake, yes.
With Diamond
So-
Lake.
Okay, that
Sure.
was the only question I had.
Okay. 130, school district philosophy. I kind of wanted just to confirm that we're using the mission statement is the old one, and then the vision was the aspire. I just wanted to make sure that was correct.
Yeah, the only comment I had on that was,
Oh, thank you, Anna.
you know, the Aspire portrait of a learner is great. Would we want to put that in there just so that language is in there? Just adding what each of the letters means.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking something
Do we
was
reference
missing
it? It would be
here,
cool
yeah.
to be able to see in that, you know, exactly what Aspire is.
If that makes sense.
I really like the mission statement. I think it's cool because it somewhat emulates the mission statement for the high school. Their mission is academic excellence through core values, equity, growth, and collaboration. And when we talk about, you know, building bright futures, we are talking about that collaboration. and that growth. So I thought that was kind of cool, just kind of reflects the same values that our students are going to be working on when they get to high school.
210, school district governance.
Sorry, I had one more. on the
Oh, I'm
previous one.
sorry. There was a pause. Wait,
And
was
this is
130?
This is very minor. Yeah, 130. I don't know if this matters at all, but I just wanted to bring it up. The value statement ends with District 75 emphasizes. To me, when I read that, it should just say values if it's our value statement. But again, this is very minor, and maybe I'm the only one that thinks that. They really mean the same thing. That's just me.
You're saying you should say values?
Yeah, that's the value statement. This is what we value.
Yeah, because do we need to talk about continuous improvement? It just kind of seems to get off. Like you said, values are values. Continuous improvement is more a process. Are you saying? take
I was
all of
still
that
okay
out?
with that. I was just,
Oh, okay.
Just the word emphasize, you should say values. So D75 values.
again, it doesn't really change the policy at all, so.
Yeah.
it's- it's fine.
Oh, just an overall question. Christine and I had talked about this the other day. So as we do this, like if you know it's dated, it's adopted as is on a certain date. So if do we want like a separate review date footnote? I don't know if the system can do that, or do we just keep kind of a log? We were debating of a log going where we know. Log.
Can't change it unless you
Can't
actually
change, okay.
do it through press.
But we can't mark it just reviewed on a such and such date.
Because I think name on it, that probably makes sense. That was a question we were gonna ask on it. So
Yeah,
that-
yeah.
Because we don't know the system, but we could keep a log such that when we do the press policy review, we would say, this one should have a change with district edits, and then that would automatically get updated whatever day we pass it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like this index, is this on a shared drive? Because then we could even have it in more columns, like, here's the policy. Talked, however you want to describe this session, talked about it on X, feedback for, just some sort of tracking where we know we looked at it, we've discussed it. We want to make this change and then we implement it.
So Anna's shaking her head yes. I don't know where she put it.
I'm making my notes, but I think that's the thing. It's like no questions, then you add a policy next one, you can put no questions.
And we
you
can
add
put a
notes,
date and then we know, right?
You should
things
say-
like that.
Right, and that's what she's, sounds like Anna's on it. So.
Oh, can I ask a clarifying question? I was thinking about this question. Would it make sense to, as we're reviewing this, that we do something where we skip like the last press update? We skip those policies since we just examined it and changed the policy in theory.
I think we just skim right over it. If it's on here, this allows, see, because my idea with this was that the reason why it doesn't have a specific date on it is that we theoretically, this could be the guide that we use going forward in future years too. But if we have a table that Anna's creating for us to keep track of when we did it, at like the April meeting, when we review these things, if it's something we'd already passed, we just wouldn't have any further comments. We'd say, okay, we talked about it, no questions, no comments, moving on.
Sure.
That way, because each time when press does come out with some changes, they're gonna go back even on the ones we've already changed or reviewed, and then we are gonna do it as a whole, but.
And I think if we include it, even though we talked about it in a previous press thing, a board member might have more experience and then look at it in a different way, so it's
Yeah.
still the opportunity to absorb it and understand it.
Sure.
Or we could skip it.
That's what I was saying. Skip it. It just seems like, double the amount of work for someone.
No,
who just
no,
spent time
it's
on the
only
month before,
there
but-
for you if you
Yeah,
want to.
yeah.
Well, and if maybe not everyone read them in full because they just trusted Lisa and my comments on the last ones, maybe now as they read through it, they'll have different
Yeah, or
comments.
like, greater perspective
fine,
as we
right.
go along, so, okay. 210, school district governance.
have no concerns with that. It's pretty straightforward, just legal structure.
All right, this was my favorite one, 220, powers and duties. And it was more just, some of them were just questions, some of them I just underlined because as a reminder. So on number 7, I think I had flagged this on the last press, though it got kind of lost. The last part, establishing a resource conservation policy, like, so this policy is directing us to create another policy.
I had that highlighted in mine too.
I didn't know what that meant, or if that's something we even have to have, or. I don't even know what that would mean, you know, that could be anything from recycling paper and cans from the lunchroom to how do we dispose of our old textbooks, desks and whatever, so I don't have any idea what this means. And maybe we can take that as an ask to, I don't, not probably the lawyers, but maybe IASB
Laura Martinez is the rep.
or right rep, yeah. No, we have one. Is it? It's not working.
No, she still has,
Sure.
she still spoke the other night. so.
Oh, okay, I thought it was different. So that's the action on that one, ask. I have more, but I'm happy to trade
Go for
off
it.
with people with questions.
Okay.
So I just underlined 9, as an interesting point, curriculum, textbooks, and educational services. As an example, I think where we are supposed, you know, we get proposals, we have them explained to us, and I just highlighted it as, you know, do we want to talk about, as a specific example, how to work that better or improve, or I just wanted to put it out there for discussion, because I know we've now had 2 processes, right? We've had the bilingual program revision, and then we've had the literacy revision. And so maybe looking at those processes as an example of what went well and how we interacted with the admin good or well, or how we could do better, or and vice versa, because I know when the bilingual program came up, one of the private discussions I had with someone was like, it would have been nice to have the whole project plan early in the fall, so then when they came for approval in the spring, it wasn't the surprise that it was, and I think everybody learned from that, so I just thought this could be an area, and whether it's this, or I know we did something today about the mobile classroom, because that was an immediate need that kind of came up, so you couldn't really plan a whole year in advance for that. Or maybe you could, I don't know, it's up to debate, but.
Well, they did start in the fall.
Right, so
it's-
they, so again, that was kind of an example, so I don't know if we wanted to talk any more about. Not just the fact that we approve stuff, but, well, and just the general
Well,
cadence of big purchases and approval processes.
I think that we have to remember is what we're looking at as a policy, which basically is given direction. And if you go back to the top, it says the major powers and duties of the Board of Education include, but are not limited to, approving the curriculum, textbooks, and educational services. I don't know that the need in the policy to go and expand into detail what that is. I mean, it's what it's saying as part of the policies directing that part of our responsibility and authority is to approve curriculum, textbooks, and educational services.
Yeah. How
So
we
it
do
came
it.
to us, we approved it, so we're compliant with the policy. I don't think the policy is asking for the detail of how you approved it and what was it you approved. So I think we have to remember what the intent of policy is.
Well, and the what is under section 6 of curriculum, like there is a whole curriculum policy,
Yeah.
which we'll get to in
Right.
October.
Right.
When we get to
Yeah.
that. But,
Right.
and I was just gonna remind, we've also had I think we just approved in the last year, we changed the math curriculum at the middle school a little bit too. So and I know, as I recall, there's a table with the cycle because we do that every couple of years. And so it's not as though all of it gets brought in one year and then not.
So
So
I guess
for
my
planning.
question
purposes.
is more, okay, it's not part of the policy, but should we be providing, I'm not gonna say better guidance, but just guidance as to what we want to see. We want to see a communication plan, we want to see cost, we want to see, what options were considered, we want to, I mean, so basically all the things that are happening, but in a more, I was just wondering if we needed to more formalize what the expectations were. When we're,
Well, if we were gonna do that, and those are things that eventually, as we've talked about, when we look at strategic planning and
Right.
those kinds of things. Monitoring what's happening, those details would be part of that process. But it would be outside of the policy
understood, I just,
unless you want, and I don't know that we want to do that, have policies that start going in and directing all detail of what you're gonna do, because then every time you change it, you gotta change your policy.
I think maybe one of the things I'd add here is a suggestion. Kristen, you think you hit on it, at section 600's curriculum. What the board is identifying in policy 200 is the powers that you have to what you approve. When you get to section 600, that goes through the curriculum piece. And then in there, it should identify what are some of the administrative procedures and what are some of the things that we should be doing to provide you
oh, that's
information
what
about
I
the
guess
curriculum.
on the word administrative procedures
So-
is more. okay.
Yeah, those are two separate things. So I think now it's acknowledging, yes, we understand these are board powers and duties. Maybe make a note, we get to section 600, let's clarify maybe any questions that might be related to curriculum adoption.
I think this is just delineating.
Okay,
what
no,
we
it's
do as
fine,
a
I just,
board.
like
Right,
I
no,
said, I was
it's-
just, that's what I took away from
Sure.
this particular section. I just flagged 21 as an important piece, not that, like you said, we have to get into anything more about it, the last one.
I'm not disagreeing with it, but I find it interesting that number 15 is listed and delineated as a board duty that we
I
have to
know, I
establish
found that
and hold an event
interesting
to hold a moment of silence to recognize, well, what about September 11th? What about, I mean, there's, that seemed, that to me, that felt like minutia. They got.
Yeah,
But I don't know why,
agree
but
with you.
I
yeah.
don't know that
Right before providing transportation services.
they're one and the same, obviously, but I just found that interesting. I'm not necessarily proposing we change it. I just found
No,
that.
I found it interesting.
And some of these, such as 18, complying with the requirements of abuse and neglected child reporting, I mean, some of these, we don't have the ability to change. I mean, we have to do, these are all prescribed by law, so.
Yep.
And that's why we have to be careful with any changes we do discuss here as a board. We have to make sure with our attorney that we're allowed to take, add that in or take it out, because not this isn't just for us to.
But even so, the important point is we're reviewing it.
Yep.
And we're putting it up front. We're aware of it.
Right. I didn't have any changes.
No, I didn't either. Oh, there is a 470 is a resource conservation policy. We'll have to wait till June to look at that.
And I was looking at the cross references, but there's a lot of cross
Yeah, there's
references
a
there,
lot.
because I was trying
I
to
was
figure out,
looking
there's
for the
gotta be
moment.
something that,
Yeah, so we
and
have,
that probably was an automatic press policy once they added the other one, that it bumped it up there and added it all in, and, yeah.
oh, but I brought my copy.
Okay.
You guys can move on. I'm just gonna look it up.
Yeah, and I like 21, but again, that's just, yes, it is our duty as board members to communicate the school's activities and operations to the community. And we can talk about different ways of doing that in other sections as we get down, because there's sections on that as we get to it. Yes, your board, you can do that. All right.
Third.
2:30,
Third.
elections.
Okay. I was gonna say, I feel like all these, this next section, except for probably 2:120, is pretty much prescribed by law. I don't know that
Correct.
there's anything.
It's
that
more
we-
just for us to know about it.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Oh, I'm sorry, which one are we in?
2:30.
Oh, yeah, I had a question. The second paragraph B, I was just curious if we've ever asked to be placed on the ballot advisory questions of public policy. And what that would be, is that's not a referendum increase.
I'm supposed to be taking that as such.
An advisory question could be something that gets put on to say, if we were to go to the trouble in a couple of years of doing all that's required to put something on the referendum, would you likely pass it? So we could sort of test the waters and when people are already going to vote.
I don't know that.
But if you're going to go to the trouble of doing it, you may as well then do, if you're doing a referendum, just do it. And then if it passes, fail, but whatever, but we're not, that's not. on
I
today's
just found that
slide.
interesting as opposed to polling your.
I found it interesting and learned that I had no idea that the election for Board of Education had anything to do with the celebration of Passover, and I find it enlightening that it's part of this election code to have that put in there, because I didn't know that that was there.
I thought that interesting too. It was just.
And it could
interesting to read
conflict
this.
because of the holiday,
Yeah.
but it I find interesting is because it is a school holiday. I like that there's a recognition of, at least we're not gonna hold elections that conflict with Passover. We might have school, but we're not gonna have elections for school board members, but that's fine. All right. Yes, you know, generally speaking, I didn't have any other comments, but I just thought it was good for us to all know kind of that there is an authority to remove board members from office. You've gotten to experience how to fill a vacancy.
Yeah, I didn't have any
We've all taken
questions on
the oath.
any more or comments.
I think that the conflict of interest and the ethics and gift ban is good for us to all be aware of.
I got lost in the political activity, so I just stopped reading it. It just was like, what, wait. The compensated times and prohibited sources, that one just kind of made my eyes glaze over.
And we did talk, to Kevin's point, we did talk about the section 2110 a little bit in the press review at the last time, you know, because we talked about some of the questions that we had while reviewing it, thinking about secretary and recording secretary and whether we needed to make that change to memorialize what we are doing as a district, which on first read seemed to be a little different than what's prescribed there. But we did consult the attorney to refresh everyone's memory on that. We did consult with the attorney and got feedback that indicated that, you know, because any changes, if were we not to have somebody like Anna to be our recording secretary, to the extent that we were expecting whoever on our board at that point would be the secretary to do all of those duties. That is the only board position that would be eligible for a very small stipend to do that. But clearly we don't do that as a board because we are not taking on those roles and responsibilities as board members. And we have a paid recording secretary, so we don't need that. And if we were to make that change, we would have to do it well in advance of us seating a board, and I want to say it was 180 days in advance of seating a board and doing all of that. So none of us are interested in changing that or going through that. We'd already discussed that, but just to refresh everyone about that. And then I think the one that we need to flesh out and spend some time with is 2120 about board member development. We all had to maintain, you know, the mandatory training initially that's required by the state. And I found it interesting about the para, having learned about that in other forums, but the Performance Evaluation Reform Act, we would all have to engage in specialized a dismissal of a teacher were that ever to be a tenured teacher, were that ever to be an issue. So I don't know how it is not something presently before us, but if that issue ever arose in the future, I don't know in practice how that would be done. Would you have to give us notice that you were bringing something to that effect so that we could all quickly take that training?
You should have taken it already.
That was part of the
As part of
mandatory
your
training.
Initial training that you took when you first.
Very memorable, clearly.
Yeah, I don't know.
The purpose of it is that you've been at least informed of it as board members, not necessarily you have to know everything behind it, why somebody's being released. And it's just so that people can't say you're doing it without the knowledge of what that means. So we could certainly at some point go over what does the standard order dismissal list mean and how does that work? To help the board if we ever got to that point, but we would, like my Friday updates where I say we're looking at staffing, I'd say we may be looking at RIFs this year.
Okay.
So you would know, right,
We're not.
but we're not now, not happening.
It was not discussed in the staffing today.
Correct.
Right.
So yes, that's where the notes.
One comment would be that if we were to get to a point of having a handbook for the district, perhaps the board members could also be supplied with a copy when the staff is just to. And I know there's been lots of discussion about how we would want to implement the new board member orientation process, since that has not been fleshed out in great detail or formalized. And we've all expressed an interest in trying to figure out what that should be so that someday when we have new board members, we have a plan in place for how to welcome them and get them up to speed with all the fun things we're doing.
So they're given a policy manual, then it looks like one or more special board meetings to become acquainted with and review board processes and procedures. And was that the joint thing that you were referring to that we thought should be separate from D120, or that was totally different? That was a more.
That was, well. So,
Was it
yeah.
doubling as this perhaps?
I mean, my comment was, I feel like when in the future we have new District 75 board members, I do feel like we need to have, even if it's a special meeting or a separate meeting, separate and apart from,
Yeah, and
we
that's
tend
what
to-
this is
right,
saying, yeah,
I agree.
which is spot on.
right, and
Well, or it says, or a regular board.
or a regular board meeting, and I don't care if we do it a regular wording, but my recollection is, and I know it's a little skewed because of the weird last couple of years, but we get sworn in May, and then that next board meeting tends to be the joint one, because we do 2 joint ones with D120 twice a year. And then that's when we do the evaluation and all, but the new board members have barely had a chance to be on board, and then suddenly doing an evaluation, especially when it's with another district. I'm just wondering if we need to. Now, I will point out, I think that the way, from my understanding, from the IESB division meeting that we went to, and all the emails that we get from the legislative updates, I think they are changing that a little bit so that, and it's on this next session, so it's, and they expect it to pass, that it is going to have a little bit more leeway with how quickly we have to have a special meeting after the election in order to accommodate. The idea from that being that you would do that at the next regular board meeting and not necessarily make that. I just don't remember when we do our joint meetings. I feel like they were always right away, but maybe they weren't. I don't remember if it's June and.
You know, this year wasn't, when we came out in April and May, they had the joint meeting.
On
I
a-
was just gonna say too, there's another section, and I was just trying to see if I could find it, that goes to this orientation. This is just kind of a general overview. But the other section that has the detail talks about appointing a mentor. And it goes into the detail of what the mentor should be doing.
That's on here too.
No, but he's right.
There is, I think it's
There
in
was
it's
more-
in 2 sections, because it's here too. It says the board president may request a veteran board member to mentor anyone.
And
Might
it
be-
goes into more detail.
Right.
about what the
Maybe
mentor-
there's cross.
Because you might remember that when we first talked about this,
Yeah.
I pointed out that even though Freddie didn't know it, he was my mentor.
Well, that's my point. That's why we all needed to invite discussion, because
Sure,
we need to
right.
know more about this and have something in place. And that was just the separating of the, so I was gonna, Anna, when do we do the joint board?
It's usually in July.
July? See, I felt like it was sooner than that. Okay.
It's either June or July, one of the two.
Okay.
This last time, I believe it was in July.
Okay.
So under the new board member orientation, number 3 says the board president may request a veteran board member to mentor a new member. You know, we had kind of talked about changing that language. One suggestion is it could say the president shall mentor or appoint a mentor.
Before we change this, I think we should find the other section, because it goes into that detail. So rather than trying to change this, let's see if I can find it. Because it might already cover it in another section, just like you said with Christie, what 600 goes into that.
Yeah, because it was one of your first press reviews, I think.
And I thought it was, but I thought it was this section, but
I did too, so
but if there is,
Yeah, there
that's
was
fine.
some-
And if we find another one, we can do. Clearly, if we were to make changes to one, if there are 2 sections and references to it, we can make changes to both. The good thing about the online one is I think it does have the ability to search for some things, so.
Yeah, the only place where like mentor shows up in a meaningful way for board members is the section we're looking at right now.
Yeah, this was the one that I thought it was, because I remember being surprised to find out that there was even a section on mentoring and orientation, because I didn't know that it existed before. I do recall attending a meeting before the first board meeting where my eyes glazed over with tea and trying to get, not on purpose, just saying. I just remember being overwhelmed. That's all I'm saying. As a new board member, it's not you, it's everything. I'm
Oh,
just
right,
saying.
because we were talking about like, new board members might want to meet with the because
Right.
somebody did.
And we did it, but
say that
it was
in
like a meeting, boom, 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 and I
Like,
just remember
yeah.
hearing lots of.
So there was a list, you're right.
So
We
I'm
can
just
do
saying a
it,
more
so-
formal orientation process may have been helpful to feel less overwhelmed. That had nothing to do with tea. I just remember sitting there going, what did I sign up for?
So we can make a note, there's more formal itemization of. Because like, When I first started, after we all got waylaid to these positions, you and I, and Dr. Myers met the lawyers out, so that was part of the onboarding, you know, so.
Yeah.
This book has also been a great resource. I don't know if we want to.
Yeah, we can add
anything
stuff
about
like
that.
that.
Does Members get a copy of the book.
Have a welcome package. Checklist of who to talk to, when, who's gonna be your mentor, what to do.
Well, and that seems to be under number one here, where it says, the board president or superintendent or designees give each new board member a copy or online access to the policy manual, but that would be our lovely thing here, and show you where to find it on the website, which I know I did at one of the meetings. We didn't know where to find it. That didn't help if the website changed, but that was a whole different issue. But the board's regular meeting minutes for the last year and other helpful information, such as probably how to find, you know, when you get the email each month, how do you find the board packet? How do you access it, look at it, answer the question, you know, just going through kind of the how-tos and how to do that, especially those of us that are not Google inclined. Speaking for myself,
Toolkit.
and it says all new members are encouraged to attend the workshops, you know, do that. I am going
So,
one step further. I encourage all members to attend more than just the new members of the workshops. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them are webinars that are easy to do at lunchtime, and I mean,
they're all
lots of
recorded
information.
too, so.
yeah.
The question about the self-evaluation section there. It's very brief, but it says that the board conducts periodic self-evaluations. That's something that we do.
Who's that then?
Yeah.
Well, so on the one hand, I think that's the checklist that we get at the, after each meeting. I think that's when that was
But you
initially.
did that. Was that like a year?
But every other year,
Uh-huh.
we
Yeah.
got the school board association
Yeah.
rep comes in
Okay.
and they do a self-evaluation.
Okay.
And that's the one that we do with the joint with 120, and I think that's the one that was in July that we've done that. My point was, and I know you stepped out of the room, Kev, but my point was, is I almost feel like we should shift that a little bit, because it's really hard for new members to effectively self-evaluate when it's only their second meeting. That's the point, maybe, so I guess I was incorrect that it's not the first meeting, it's second or third, but it's, you're still so new and not having done much yet. I don't know that it's an effective tool at that point in our year.
So I think, I believe there's two. I believe there's one, it's the starting right workshop, which I think that's the one I think we first did. And then there's the one where I think she does do, where they actually do the more evaluative one, like kind of analyzing how you've done as a board for the year. But I agree with you. Some of we do need to break that up.
And the starting right one, I just wonder if it would be more effective our own board rather than the joint, because we are different boards, and I think the tone in the room is just very different when we're together. That's not to say it's just different. And especially when you're new, when you're trying to talk about how we do things versus how another board, I'm just wondering if that's more effective. That's not to say I don't like the joint meetings and that I don't think there's a benefit to having them. I do. But maybe not that
I
task.
understand.
So that's my,
We haven't had a joint board meeting in quite a while.
Yeah, that's since we did the starting right.
in
workshop.
July. We used to do them twice a year, but. Oh,
Okay, so have we made any substantial changes to this policy we were just talking about board member development? We were talking about looking for another policy, but
I think we,
we think it's this
I
policy.
think it's this one.
I think we want to gather some more notes, because there's recollection that maybe there was another version, and then when the press came through, it refreshed it, and we lost maybe some of
Well, since we're not making changes and voting on them today, I think that gives us an opportunity to take a deeper look at it. And when we get to the point of making that, we know that this is one we want to make some revisions to, but we don't have to necessarily figure those out today. And we all know that we don't get compensated. We are allowed reimbursement for the itemized expenses and things that are set forth in here.
Okay. Are we ready to move on then, ladies?
Aye.
Okay. Next item is representative updates. The first is the STEAM Foundation.
I can report that the STEAM Foundation decided, I was able to make the end of the meeting last week because there was another meeting here. They did the Explorers program, the Science Explorers program that they are trying to implement. The initial idea was to do maybe one per building and try to have a mentor and a mentor from the field. So if you chose, a particular science project, having a scientist that you work with along with a faculty member that will help work with you to mentor you in doing a science project of some sort, and then they would actually give you a budget that you got to use for supplies and materials to put it together. And then the idea being that at the end of all of it, you get to present it. So we were brainstorming different ideas of how that would work and how that would, where that would be presented. And the idea was thrown out that one of the things that they would like to do is we could have each of those kids come to a board meeting and present. Well, when they put out the applications and got to do that, because they're trying to do this in the next few months with the idea of wrapping this up before the end of the school year, we ended up having 14 applicants, and rather than picking and choosing and telling some yes and no, they decided to go ahead and fund all 14 of them. So they are doing all 14 of these young kids that range the grades to do this. But one of the things we talked about is that would be a little bit overwhelming to have them all present at a board meeting or a number of board meetings, given all the other things on our agenda. So what we've tentatively set up is, and discussed with them, and I got permission and bringing it to you, is before our May board meeting, since we often are invited to come early anyway and gather out in the open area as you walk in, we're gonna have a space set up for them to present, and all of the board members would be invited to come a little bit early and be able to walk and take a look at the presentations that they have on display. And then we would collectively recognize them at the board meeting without necessarily giving each of them 5 minutes or whatever, because that would be long. So I would encourage everybody to plan for our May board meeting if you can, and if you can work it in your schedule to come a little bit early to meet these young students and see their projects and get to do, since this is an inaugural year doing this and trying to encourage them, since we don't have a traditional science fair at all of the schools like some do. So this is a unique opportunity and something to pull it together. The other thing is, I know I saw on Facebook today that Medline did come out and get to go over to Sandburg to take a look at that. And there were some photo opportunities since the media center that they've, Medline and Granger, I think it was, both donated funds, as we've talked about before, to put that in. So I would hope that at some point when I know it's not totally done yet, so they wanted to come out and see progress. When it is done, then I would hope that we could arrange a tour so we could see it too. Because I think it's a unique opportunity that they're hoping to use in some of I know we didn't have the winter Saturday Scholars or Saturday Steamers, and doing all of that. So, but when they have that again, hopefully next year, when we get to do that, get back to that, they'll be able to utilize that for many more activities that give more option for extracurricular and curricular funding within the electives, the related arts electives. So that's exciting to see that that's coming to fruition, and with our board, with our district's help and some independent help. So that's the latest step.
Okay, CEDAW, sure.
CEDAW, I was at the governing board meeting 2 weeks ago. It was very, very brief. We appointed a nominating committee for governing board officers and the executive board. There was a report on post-issuance tax compliance reporting with the electronic municipal marketing access. Emma, I'm still learning about that, learning more and more about these bonds. There was a report on the CEDAW Foundation. The CEDAW Foundation is just a group that raises funds to support CEDAW initiatives and programming. And that was basically it for that meeting. The next executive board meeting is April 14th, and the next governing board meeting is June 1st.
Thank you. Community outreach, village liaison, Ray.
No report.
Okay. And then the last one is the equity committee.
I didn't even know I was on the committee.
Oh,
Well, we met.
You're an honorary member
Yeah.
because you come every time.
We got together and worked on starting really to put together our own draft of a policy based on the example that received the most feedback from the community members and our group. We really started to go through the structure of that draft. The biggest thing that we did was remove a lot of like there was a preamble to it, a lot of like information to kind of set up the equity policy, and we didn't really feel that that was appropriate or necessary really. So we removed that, and then in our next meeting, we're going to present the draft as well as some definitions that we feel should be in that policy. I think we're hoping to get some feedback then from the community members on that draft and see what kind of changes might be needed, and we'll make those changes.
So with that in mind, we have previously put out a calendar of dates at the beginning of the year. But we have noticed that our next scheduled, we didn't have one this month because of spring break and all the other committee meetings. The next one would be in April. It happens to be scheduled for the same night as this board meeting is in April, so that's not going to work. So we're going to have to come up with a new date. Huh?
Isn't it the day of the negotiation?
Maybe it's the negotiation.
No, it's a board meeting. It's a
But I
regular board.
feel
meeting.
like it was a board meeting.
It's a regular board. meeting.
19th.
The 19th, yeah. Most of our equity meetings are usually on the.
And I think it's because
It is
that
Easter
is the
Monday.
day after Easter, and that may have been why it got moved. I don't know, but it's also Passover, but that's not a big deal. That's not a night we need to worry about. But I just noticed because I have a sheet that I was keeping track of all the different committee dates, and I looked at that, I went, wait, those overlap. What's
April
wrong with that?
11th, is that the next meeting?
What was that?
April 11th?
I had listed.
So D75 negotiations are on April 11th. I've also got the equity committee listed on the.
Yes, so that's the overlap then.
Yeah, I think you're right. I thought it was a regular board meeting, but it is.
Since Freddie and I are on both, and on all three, it just sort of blended together. I knew there was a conflict.
Yeah.
That's,
That's the 11th, yeah, April 11th. The following Monday is Easter Monday. I don't know.
Oh,
if
I'm
that's an
sorry.
Issue and text it. And text it.
Okay, anything else about equity? Can we move on then?
well, I think
No,
we
we're
need to set the
we're
talking
setting
about
the
for the
date.
equity committee.
Okay,
That's what we're trying to do.
To the 25th, that's a Monday.
Does it have to be on a Monday? No, because we have negotiations that day.
Oh, okay. Be on a Monday. That's what we had told community members when we put it out there that they were gonna be Mondays.
But we
Tuesday, the
also
12th?
said subject to change,
Yeah.
as we know.
What about the fourth?
I'm not here.
Okay,
I'll be out.
I could do Tuesday the 12th, the day after there's a meeting scheduled. I don't know if that works.
make it work. I can
Tuesday the 12th? Okay, unfortunately, I skipped over two more committee updates, so we need to go back. First, the second one is Finance Advisory Committee.
So we're meeting next Monday. First, right? So we're gonna review the budget before it's adopted or presented in April, and then we're gonna start our
more for you guys.
Okay, great.
We will have more.
And then the last one is the art of school boarding, book review, chapters 9 through 15. We want to go around like we did last time?
You want to just.
Or do we want to
Highlights?
just throw stuff out?
Yeah,
Highlights are a good idea.
because it's got like right here, right?
I was gonna say, do you want to vote on something and then go back to conversation since we've been talking?
Let's finish this and we'll do a bunch of voting in a row. Well, I already talked about the fireworks story.
It's fine.
There's so many good stories and like real life examples. I really enjoyed that part of it. I really enjoyed earlier in the section that we did, I enjoyed the bowling team, like all the things behind the scenes to make that happen. I have to be honest though, I really wanted to hear like what happened after the third year.
Yeah.
But
But I,
that'll be in the next book.
I also enjoyed that story because, I mean, they did know that there was gonna be challenges in continuing that. But there is so much input on making it happen for, you know, the time being and with the resources that were there. It was just cool to see that they were willing to take that chance and make something happen.
And then I read in particular interest the paragraph in, I think, chapter 12 of your legacy. Since I'm headed that way and a little, not too long. So that's what I had.
I think chapter 9, Money Matters, was probably the biggest one for me. I know from my experiences in meetings and from reading this chapter that this is my biggest area of need, is to keep learning and growing in the area of school finance. So that was just helpful to kind of start thinking about those different things. And it was perfect timing because I read that chapter right before the Wednesday night meeting about school finance. So that was really good. Biggest thing that really stood out to me was just thinking about the way that one-time funds are spent. You know, I hadn't really considered that before. And if funds are just a one-time fund, you need to make sure that you're not funding something that's going to require ongoing funds. Let's see. I thought chapter 12, school boarding at its best, was really good. There's a lot of great examples, and you know, there's a lot of examples of board members that he presented that I said, you know, I want to be like that, or I want to make sure that I do this. There was a whole list of, he never gave the name, he just called her she. And there was like 12 different things that he said made this board member an exemplary board member, and there's a couple of good ones in there that I highlighted. One of them was she read the mission statement at the beginning of every meeting and had it memorized. And then the next one was, she always asked, I think it's, how is this best for the students, or, you know, or how does this impact the students best? And I thought that was cool how she kind of always brought that home. As far as the legacy goes, I wrote that I don't want my name to be remembered in any of this. When people think about the board, I want them to just think about the positive impact on the students and not worry so much about any of us. I think if we're doing our job really good, they're not thinking about us, they're just seeing the impact on the students.
I guess I'll go, just a couple of things that I guess hit home is chapter 9 was about being cautious of things that you say in negotiations, so that obviously it's near and dear right now. I mean, similar to Eric, I mean, the finance portion of it, I mean, I've learned a ton. I mean, I've always said it in every time we talk about finance. It's different than the finance I deal with on a day-to-day basis, so I'm learning every day. The finance committee has been great for me. I'm sure there's a lot more for me to understand, so just, you know, knowing that, you know, understanding what financially being financially stable means, right? Saying it is one thing, understanding what it means is another. So just making sure for the benefit of the board, obviously, but then just knowledge is power, right, for me as well. Continue to go down that road. Trusting the experts is something that I just underlined and highlighted. I think we've all talked about it in the past. Understanding that, yes, we're here as a board, as 7, as a group, but making sure we trust the experts. Again, I'm not a teacher or superintendent or CFO or anything like that, so. But I also read a lot about asking questions and making sure we do, get the information that we need. I feel like in just a short amount of time that I've been here, we have gotten more data. I think that's something we've all kind of discussed individually amongst ourselves. Can we do better? Absolutely. But I think we're trending in the right direction. One of the stories that obviously hit near and dear to my heart too was the custodian story. I thought that was cool, just about professional development. And that's what I do with on a day-to-day basis, right? How do we make our employees more efficient and better themselves and better for our customers? So that's pretty much it.
Lucy, what else?
Sure, I think a lot of, we're all reading the same thing, but I just circled, I think we do this most of the time, and it was on page 103, how it was their practice to have a discussion item at one meeting and then an action item at the next. So there's time for not only the board to absorb a topic, but the community, if they're interested in listening, and then provide the feedback.
We sort of used to do that when we had 2 meetings a month.
Yeah.
We used to present stuff at the first meeting, and then the second meeting was more like. Very rare were there action items at the first meeting, only if it was something like that we needed that day or that week, and then most of the action items were at the second. So just a difference between how we do things now.
Yeah, and because even reading stuff a few days in advance, there's always things you think of later, so I like that cadence. I just couldn't help but highlight on 91, a crisis situation brings the community together, but if a district is not open and transparent, the crisis may work against those efforts. So we've kind of been in a difficult situation, and I think it'd be instructional at some point to go back and be brief about stuff and say, here's what we did and learn from it. Here's what we did really well. Maybe we could apply it in a non-crisis situation, or here's where we could have been better on communication, and just learn from it, because everybody's doing the best they can. Yeah, I like the descriptions of the board members, so I think that's my takeaways.
Christie, want to go next?
Sure. I will be brief. I liked also the comments are in 71, 2 different things that both hit home. For one, it says recommend without any hesitation, school board members ask the tough questions. We all know I talk a lot and I ask a lot of questions. I do that because that's how I learn, and that's just the nature of how I do things. And I do that, but that doesn't mean that I'm critical or actually against whatever I'm asking about. Sometimes it's playing devil's advocate, because again, I'm really good at arguing on both sides, because that's an occupational hazard. And so I like that it's encouraging to do that rather than telling me I should be asking questions, because sometimes I wonder if I should. So I like that. I also liked in the financial stability section right above that, talking about bringing it down and talking about it, using it as the school finance scenario is like as a home budget. And I've done that a few times recently when it's come up and things to talk about, that it's committees that, it's like our fund balance is like having a savings account. That doesn't mean you're going to deplete it or use it for every little thing you have. It's got specific purposes and we have to do. And the income coming in that we're doing, that's what we have to, put. It's sometimes helpful to analogize it to a home budget. And I liked the idea of doing that, because sometimes, and like when you're learning all these complicated financial things that we're not used to reading and doing in our normal day-to-day, it's helpful to kind of break it down to put it into terms that way, like a personal budget. So I think that that's helpful, and that we could do, we can all learn from that, and that it's helpful to consider that when we're being asked to do things like some of the things up tonight, what is a one-time fund versus an ongoing expense that then we have to fund down the road and keep funding. And we don't want to get into a position of being unstable, financial instability. So that's.
Perfect, thank you, Rick. We're gonna end with you tonight.
Well, like Lisa said, that we all read the same thing. But I think it's important. I thought these last chapters compared to the first ones were kind of like you were saying, more personalized with the expert advice and the stories. But even when we look at where we're at and what we're doing, the finance one, we're gonna be talking about budget next month and where we're going, and they talked a little bit about some of that and things that grants and things that we should be thinking about. Programs and growth, the curriculum, and I want to come back to that, the relationships. They hit expert advice and talked about all the relationships and how all of those become very significant to success. And I thought those expert advice and descriptions of those relationships, and even some of them were, if they're not appropriate or they're not done right, equates to failure as a board. Then the 13 was just totally expert advice. But I thought what was significant too is a chapter of taking care of you. I mean, it's a whole thing that, not just on the board, but in general, that we don't think about. And the stress of what we're doing at, jobs that you're working and things that you're doing. And then you come into this environment that does create stress. I thought that was really good that they included that, because we do need to think about taking care of us and each other. But going back to the curriculum, there was a paragraph in it that just really struck me, and I thought it was very, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I thought it was very significant, because even when we look at what we're talking about tonight with Mechanics Grove and the purchase, because it starts with curriculum. And we've made investments in curriculum programs and educational programs. And the other piece of it now becomes, if we don't make this purchase, we're creating an environment where we're wasting money on this side because it's not a conducive environment for the way this is going. And when you look at the word morale, one of the things that contributes and describes morale is expectations. So what are the expectations of not only the students learning out in the hallway or in the janitor's closet, but the teachers not having the ability to have their downtime? The expectation is they have a place to go and that they have a place to kind of unwind. So those contribute to morale, and those are kind of what I call the intangibles. And the potential damage we do because morale is deteriorating. And even if you talk about the situation as a result of COVID, because the pandemic came and we weren't aware of it, we didn't plan for it. This gives us an ability really for us to be planning for the next crisis that comes, because now we have the additional space and we're able to accommodate that. But if you'll bear with me, I just want to read this paragraph because it really, really struck me and it really sums up as far as I'm concerned everything. Curriculum often reflects income. And they made the comparisons about the town that was a farm town compared to the nuclear town, and how they had differences in money and benefits. And it also can reflect board vision. A board that settles for the bottom often lands there. A board that proposes more than the minimum and works hard to provide it usually excels, no matter what the financial structure. Boards that seek the best from what they have, work together to find solutions, and create a workplace that is positive, supportive, and caring are boards that provide a solid set of educational opportunities, no matter what. That just really, really struck me. And I think it's kind of what we've all been talking about, you know, where we're headed as a board and as a district for our community and for our kids. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're gonna head to, we did all the representative updates, we're gonna head to the consent agenda. So I have moved that we approve the consent agenda as stated in our board packet.
Second.
Any discussion? Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I forgot to ask before I said, made that motion. Is there anything that anyone wants to pull out of the consent agenda? Are we all good with it? I'm glad to hear that. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Gallegos.
Aye.
Pelletier.
Aye.
Rose.
Hi,
St. Clair. Aye. And Kinsky is absent.
Okay, now the board action items. I move that the Board of Education of District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve a 2-year contract extension with Lakeside Transportation, Cook, Illinois Corporation for 2 years with fee increases of 7% for the 22-23 school year and 6% for the 23-24 school year, with the estimated cost increases of $95,000 in 23 and $85,000 in 24.
a second.
Any discussion? Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Rose.
Hi,
St. Clair. Aye. Fingerhut, aye. Gallegos.
Aye.
Pelletier.
Aye.
I move that the Board of Education of District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the summer program for at-risk students to support the development of both literacy and math skills extended school year and the implementation of a jumpstart program for our incoming 22-23 kindergarten students. The cost for staffing and materials are anticipated to be $86,600 and transportation costs are estimated to be $31,500.
Second.
Any discussion about that? I just wanted to just tell you one small little thing that I didn't want to bring up before because I didn't want to slow things down, but just so you know, historically, as much as we invite students to participate in this, I just don't understand why, but we've always had a really low participation rate in summer school. I don't know if it's just the way our families operate in Mundelein, but as many kids as we would invite to participate, because obviously our scores are low and we always were trying to do it. And it was always been a struggle to get. So getting 90 students last year is like a start. And hopefully we can continue to grow it a little bit, but it's just so you all know that it's just been a struggle over the years to try to get kids to go to school over the summer.
I would venture to guess that it's because it's a half-day program, not that we can, I'm not proposing we extend it and make it a full-day program, but it's hard for families that work to, especially when you put your kids in day camp or in half-day.
Mhm.
You know, I wouldn't be around and available even if transportation is provided to
Right.
and from my house, you know,
Mhm.
that's an issue for a lot of families. I think that also because it's only 3 weeks, again, if you're making arrangements for your kid for day camps and all of that all summer, that cuts out 3 weeks. That, I mean, it's a reality that I think is there, but one, I would venture to guess last summer was a little different. You had a lot more families who had parents working from home, who could accommodate that they couldn't do that in the past because the world has changed. So that is just something, you know, but I would think that that's related, but maybe we'll, you know, I would hope that we can get high participation with that. And I know that the proposal is to extend it by a little bit so that helps give it at least more of a half day, so that if maybe a parent worked part-time, they, you know, they can do that or have to accommodate less with, you know, half-day program, but all the half-day programs that get offered, whether they're STEAM camps or summer camps or whatever, parents that work can't accommodate those without making
Anything
other
you
arrangements.
guys could add, or you ladies could add, excuse me?
Yes, so we've been brainstorming ways to address that. One of the ideas we came up with was seeking donations from our local partnerships and saying to the students, like, if you come for a full week, maybe Luke's will donate, you get a hot dog ticket. Or if you come for a full week, you get a free skate pass, or you get a scoop of custard, or so we have a letter that we're planning on sharing to say, we're really trying to encourage students to come consistently. You know, we've been very generous to our district in the past. this is something you'd be interested in partnering with us for the summer. We're also hoping that the idea of including the kind of that recess component, or we have 2 PE teachers who are interested in working in summer school. So having some structured play opportunities. If they come and they're having a enjoyable learning experience, we're hoping that then they'll continue to come. And so then the teachers will feel more comfortable in having students who are excited to be there, just as much as the students would be excited to be there and enjoy learning with the teachers.
I'm just curious, because I have no idea, what's summer school like at high school?
There's 2 whole sessions, like 2 3 to 4 week sessions.
Yeah, but I would say it probably mirrors, you say a lower turnout. There's not that many offerings for students in 9-12. And it's not as robust as it needs to be or could be probably.
It's not conducive with a lot of camp opportunities.
Correct. That is one of the bigger issues. It does conflict with camps. But it's in the morning or afternoon.
Let me guess, you don't have a problem filling the driver's ed slots though.
No, no issues there.
Well,
Our goal
running
is to have
gaps are
a
just
phenomenal
silent
program this
services.
year. And for every student who comes, they're gonna bring a friend next year. We're gonna have a recruit, a 1-for-1 program.
Okay, sorry, I digress a little bit, but I was just curious. I just wanted you to know that historical thing about District 75. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly,
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Rose,
Aye.
Villatier.
Aye.
Gallegos,
Aye.
St. Clair.
I move the Board of Education of District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the staffing proposal for the 22-23 school year as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly,
Aye.
Villatier.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. St. Clair.
Aye.
Rose,
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Okay, we are on the school start time proposal. I'm going to make a motion to approve it. I move that District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve this 22-23 school year school start time proposal as presented. Any more discussion? Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly,
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Rose,
Aye.
Villatier.
And I move the Board of Education of District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve 1 temporary mobile classroom. I'm going to say mobile building because it has 2 classrooms
Yeah.
for the 22-23 school year, utilizing the District 75 fund balance.
Second.
Any discussion about this?
So,
Remind me sometime to tell you the story about the holes in the ground at Washington. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Rose,
aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Villatier.
Aye.
And I was not making reference, but Al Hitzky is absent for all of these. I've already previously done that. I apologize. And then, did I say Villatier? Yes. Okay.
Okay, next on our agenda is to go into executive session, but before we do that, I just want to ask, does anyone have any reason to go into executive session for questions about the minutes from the last meeting's executive session? Okay, and so I will not read that as a reason to go into executive session, and then we'll just approve the minutes after executive session, okay? All right, I move that the Board of Education enter into executive session
Second.
at 10:10 PM on 3/15/22. Second by Mr. Billetier. Will Secretary please call the roll?
Holly.
Sorry. We're going to go in for discussion of collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or the representatives. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Villatier.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Rose,
Aye.
St. Clair.
I'm sorry, aye.
Gallegos.
But I thought Freddie was injured, so I was checking it out. Yeah, we're back on now.
All right. Let's do a warning. Please call the roll.
25. Holly.
Here,
Rose.
still here.
Okay. Rose.
Here.
Okay, St. Clair.
Here.
Gallegos.
Here.
Fingerhut, here. Villatier.
I move that we approve the February 22nd, 2022 executive session minutes.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Pelletier.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Rose.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Fitzke absent.
Okay, I just wanted to talk quickly, President's prerogative. What do we want to do now that we're done with school boarding? Do we want to pick up with the code next month? Do we want to take a month off? What do we want to do with that? With the, like, after the school boarding book, after the arcs?
Well, I was thinking. Sorry.
Is he pulling-
It was hooing at you. Go ahead.
Because next month, we're gonna be starting on the budget. That would be the first, if we utilize that chapter, that would be the first thing that we start, and then go through that budget process and establish, you know, what that looks like and what that presentation is gonna look like. But as far as some of the other things, it's kind of hard to try and take, I know what you're saying, to implement what we've read and clarify what we've read. I think it's kind of hard to do that. I think maybe if we back up and start looking at the things that we were talking about, you know, the strategic plan, mission statement, goals, and a process of monitoring. And maybe we start with monitoring, and we've already doing it with the policies. I mean, what's happening with that is just phenomenal. I mean, it's put us in a position where we're going through monitoring and looking at what is happening, even the dates, and keeping track of it. So we've got documentation. And it's very important too. If anything were to happen, you know, that's the first place the lawsuits go, is to the policies, and are you following your policies? So I think that we're in good shape there. But, you know, I had talked about it too, Eric. I mean,
Yeah, the next big thing on my radar was just the strategic plan.
A suggestion I have is perhaps we should develop, I mean, not like the table of contents like I did, because obviously that was very easy to section out what's already there, but maybe we should brainstorm and have a bucket of things, you know, like you were saying, like a strategic plan, and make sure we keep maybe that a section still on our agenda to focus on school boarding. And we need to create some sort of, okay, for the next 3 months, we're gonna discuss X, Y, Z, and then maybe you can't plan a whole year in advance, I get
Yeah.
that, but maybe we can at least plan a couple months and then revisit that
Yeah.
and do that, so that we can try to figure out what we want to accomplish and how we want to do it, but set smaller goals.
I love talking about setting goals too, because when I was reading about, you know, self-evaluations, my first thought is evaluation towards a goal. So I think setting those goals is an important step for us. I know we kind of set goals when we met with the D120 board. You know, we put ideas up there, but we haven't really discussed like board specific goals that we're trying to achieve.
I mean, some of the things, and you even mentioned it earlier, was like self-evaluation. I mean, just using it as an example, when you pull that out and they talk about it, you know, that's kind of the skeleton. How do we put the meat on the bones of it, so we know what that's gonna look like? And it's not gonna be something we're doing every week or every month. But what does it look like, and when does it occur, and how does it occur? So using it as an example, there's other things in there that we can look at too, you know. Brenda or some of the other topics. But I think the main thing is that we've got to try and hold on to is that we continue to have the dialogue. That we don't, you know, just take it off the table. We've got to continue talking about it. And it's like Christie says, it's not going to all happen in 1 year, but you know, where are we going to be going with it, and how are we going to continue with it? Even Eric, you brought up with the code. And at the beginning of each meeting, just recite that one of them. Because the book did a good job of not only identifying the code, but defining what each one of them meant. So even if we, a simple, 2-minute read of here's the code and the definition out of what that goes with it as well.
Yeah.
And anyone who's watching, it's gonna remind all of us, but as well the community, that we're serious about what we're doing. Well,
I mean, that's what I talked about at the very beginning. I said, next we want to like do the code,
Yeah.
every month, like one thing every month. I mean, is that a natural progression from the book? To do that?
I mean, that's something we could start right away and implement while we're.
That's what I was
waiting
sort-
on
yeah,
other
that's what I was
things to-
thinking.
yeah, I think it'd be a
And
good
then
start.
I guess the question I would have for Eric and Ray, not as much Freddie, because he's been on the board longer, but when do you think the time would be for us to have this board's first self-evaluation sort of meeting?
Like, I guess I bring it back to the goals. When I think about evaluating myself, I'm evaluating it towards a goal. So what are our board's goals and how? That would be my starting point.
Yeah, you have to have some
Yeah.
criteria.
I need a criteria to evaluate ourselves against.
But Kevin, is what I would suggest, we're coming on a year.
Right.
But when you look at where we were the first 6 months and where we are the second 6 months of that first year. I mean, I don't know if anybody agrees. I have a sense of change occurring in the new direction that we're moving in as a new board. So maybe another 6 months out to give us an opportunity, and maybe not 6, maybe 3 months, where we have a period of time that encompasses, instead of us just coming and going through, where we started to rethink, relook, and implement. Even change it, that's the way it works. And then when you look at the change in the policy and the work that Christie and Lisa have done on that, I mean, that's phenomenal. I mean, to put a whole thing in place real quick, where we're looking at monitoring what we're doing and being aware of the policies, so. I don't know if anybody agrees with that.
I feel like the ideal time to do one of those self-evaluation workshops would be over the summer when we don't have a bunch of stuff going on that we need to like attend to, every moment. So would the summer be a good enough time? And I guess if we haven't, feel like if we haven't set goals at this point, I mean, I guess we sort of talked about it when we had the joint meeting, but I don't know that we ever like wrote down these are the district 75 goals. I mean, maybe.
And I don't know. Their district goals are just goals that the board.
So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Board districts have board goals, yeah.
As opposed to District 120 and 75.
Right,
That's
right,
weird. I
right.
yeah.
And I just wondered, should we do accept a self-examination of the first year of this board being together? And then say, okay, now that we have and I think too, now that we have an idea what it's all about after a year, we've gone through all the things that we go through, budget and staffing and yada, 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 yada. Getting ready for next year, which is we've been doing a lot lately. Then do we, after we do the self-evaluation of this past year, then do we rate goals for ourselves? When we sort of look back at what we've done, and then we can do goals, over the summer for the next school year. I mean, would that make sense?
That may be a good topic for the self-evaluation activity is to basically help write those goals
At the
as
end,
part of that. Yeah.
something at the end. Okay, can we do something like that, sir?
I'll look, see about getting something scheduled for June or July,
Okay.
possible dates and see,
Okay.
goals.
Great, thank you. I would say in the essence of time, if you have any thoughts about the Board of Education comments that we talked about at the beginning, we talked a little bit, we got the thing from the lawyer, from Katie, maybe look that over again. And just send me any comments about that, and we can sort of figure out what we're gonna do for next month, okay? Want that to be. Please remember to fill out the exit slip. I will send it to you in the next 12 hours. And I have one more thing that I didn't write down. Oh, yes. It's Dr. Meyer's evaluation time.
Wonderful.
Are you gonna do how you feel like your self-evaluation for us at some point?
Yeah, but it ain't gonna be in a time frame that you might.
Okay, so how would you like it to proceed? How do you think we should, what are your suggestions for the way we should proceed?
We'll wing it.
If you want, we can start by judging if I got a pulse and I'm breathing. Then I go from there.
All right, so far so good.
Um,
I'm thinking a big stamp that says COVID right on the
stand
side.
by.
And contract negotiations for 2
For
districts.
2 districts.
That's gonna take some time.
Or, I mean,
Just give me some time.
would this be
to-
something you would want to do maybe later?
Yeah, I'd like to see if we can't get done with one of the negotiations.
Okay.
Could be the way to put it.
Just one.
I'll work with Peter, because what I think I heard you ask. So for those of you that haven't been involved, I've traditionally tried to put together a booklet that shows what are the goals that were listed just for 75, and then what were the goals that were shared with 120 and 75, and provide the documentation that those actions have been taken to some level. And provide that to you, so then you can go through and kind of mark what you see for comments. So, tentatively, probably say end of April, maybe we do it for May, if that's fine. Or do it
Or,
then.
but, no, but
We'll go to-
I think what you said about negotiations is definitely acceptable to at least get one at a time before we start worrying about that.
Well, and can I ask, while the full color, really neat flyer booklet is nice, I don't want you to add that kind of stuff. I don't know that we need to be sold in that capacity. I think the information is helpful. I'm not as worried about the presentation, and if that takes some extra stress off of,
So just kind of getting the bare bones, just something you can flip.
I mean, I
through
could
that
be
you
wrong,
can
but
throw away.
Yeah, it doesn't.
it's not for like super public consumption that we're sending out to the whole district, like some of the things are. And while it's very pretty, I think there's a lot of things that are going on.
Okay.
And I'm
Can do.
trying to provide the grace to not necessarily have it be so pretty. I think the information is what we need, and I like the way that it was laid out with, these are the goals, and this is how I've worked to do that. I think that's important, and I think that that's what we need.
Okay,
But you know, I'm
can do
just
that,
trying to
yes.
make
much
it a simpler
appreciated.
task.
And I would like to have a conversation with you after the District 75 negotiations have concluded and we pass the contract. I'd like to have a conversation with you about, I added that section last year, like mostly COVID related. I'd like to talk to you about that, about how we want to modify that or take some out.
Okay.
So that for this coming evaluation, so that we can, because it's not I don't feel like it's as applicable as it was. I mean, it was more applicable last year. I should say.
Right.
Now we're sort of like looking at it back in hindsight.
Okay.
And I think a lot of those things could be covered in like sort of general leadership type questions instead of specific COVID ones, which I had on that evaluation the last time.
All right.
So, but after we have our contract done. Okay, anything else for President's Prerogative? Although reading the book, I feel like that one story is like, maybe you shouldn't ask that open-ended question. Because then you don't know what the board members are going to surprise you with. So, but I ask it anyway because I trust you.
Oh,
I noticed that you asked the question that he said you shouldn't ask.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I move to adjourn. Second, by Mr. Billatier. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
All right.
Anyone opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.